of September 8th, 2010. Would you please all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And good morning, Ms. Rodriguez. Would you please do the roll call?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Planning Commission hearings are televised live on County Santa Barbara Television, CSB TV, Channel 20 at 9 a.m. in the South Coast, Lompoc, Santa Ynez Valley, Santa Maria, and Orchid areas. Rebroadcast of the Planning Commission hearings are on Fridays at 5 p.m. on CSB TV, Channel 20. And now for the roll call. Commissioner Brooks?
Here.
Commissioner Cooney?
Here.
Commissioner Valencia?
Here.
Commissioner Brown?
Here.
For the record, Commissioner Blau is absent.
Thank you. And Ms. Black for the agenda status report, please.
Madam Chair, members of the Commission, good morning.
Good morning.
This morning we have a consent item on your agenda, which I believe we're ready to move forward with. Item number 1, which was the Next G appeal, as we anticipated, will be dropped from the agenda, as that issue's been resolved through a subsequent approval that your Commission made on an alternative site. The Evans appeal of the North Point project is back to your Commission again. It's been several years since you've seen that, and it's ready to move forward today. And then we will be taking up the housing element update, and that is not to occur before 12:30 at the request of the chair.
Great, thank you.
As to the projection report, we continue to have very light Planning Commission activity. I'm going to recommend that the Commission at the end of the hearing today, just in case you need another hearing, but that you cancel both the September 15th and the October 6th regularly scheduled Planning Commission hearings. And as I indicated, unless you need one of those hearings for continuation of any discussions that are continued from today's agenda. So I think we should go ahead and wait until the end of the agenda to take care of that. October 13th, you have a number of items scheduled for consideration by the Commission, including reconsideration or continuation of the Los Alamos Community Plan update. And then October 20th, we have a couple of items for your Commission's consideration, including the Maddie's Tavern Conceptual Review project. And then, as you can see, we project out just a few small items into November, and we'll see how those agendas shape up. And that's all I had to report
Great.
this morning.
All right, thank you. Now is the time for public comment, and this period is set aside to allow public testimony on items not on today's agenda. I'm wondering if we have any speaker slips for public comment. None. Oh, we have any South County?
Yes, there's one.
Dr. Russell, good morning.
Good morning. John Thorndike is here to speak to you.
Oh, is he? Okay, I don't have a speaker slip, but we welcome Mr. Thorndike.
Good morning. I'm sorry I'm late.
Good morning. You're right on time.
I had 3 glorious days up in Toro Canyon, and I just couldn't resist coming here. I heard the Board of Supervisors.
Can I get you just to move a little bit closer to that microphone so we can hear you?
Surely.
There,
Is that
thank you.
better? Yesterday, thank you, Ms. Brown, or is it Ms. Black? I get mixed up on when I'm looking away. Some attorneys say that if ordinary folks did what some county attorneys do, we would be arrested. Such a overruling judges, such as overruling judges, or I can't read my own writing, or overruling the state's SMA, that is Subdivision Map Act, while simultaneously saying we, the people, must conform to said SMA. Now, I understand the dilemma that the county has, so I try to help. And I successfully helped when I got a letter pleading with, that the US EPA wanted to get closure with you. And I allowed that to happen. It was premature, it was in reverse order. But I've been picking up my taxes this morning, minutes ago, and also the preliminary title report on what the county did with me. And I have a number of protests. One, yesterday I listened while Kevin Reddy said the final words in the Jameson thing. There's number 8 on the agenda. And prior to that, Salud Carvajal, said some interesting words, and I liked what he had to say because I agreed with him. I think the words that Mr. Reddy said were something like this. It was the final words in number 8. It was something like this: taxes do not matter. The amount of taxes is immaterial in this type of situation. Now, I just see where one department of the county paid another department of the county my taxes, but I don't own those taxes. I find that an interesting thing for the county to have done. And with that, I'll leave you, and I'll ask one question, Mrs. Black. You're the most experienced there. What do you say about this tax situation? And thank you very much for your attention.
Mr. Thorndike, thank you. Always nice to see you. I think since taxes are outside of our expertise, we won't be responding to that question. So with that, I will close public comment and move on to Planning Commissioner's informational reports. Commissioner Brooks.
Yes, thank you, Chair Brown. I attended one of the brown bag sessions. I want to commend staff for conducting, I think there were a series of 4 in the past several months, and I attended a series, one session about community walkability plans in the Santa Maria office. And I was not able to stay for the entire presentation, but it was a video of that was done by the American Planners Association. But I commend staff for taking their time during their lunch hour. Mr. Karamitsos was there, Mr. Kaiser, Ms. Abrish. And it was very informational for me, especially because later on we were going to, I think it was before the last meeting, we were discussing the Los Alamos community plan, and those issues always come up, with those plans. I also attended a workshop in Lompoc a few weeks after that on the climate action strategy update. And that was sponsored it was co-sponsored by CPA and SB Can. But again, the county staff is going out into the general public and trying to keep them abreast of some of the studies and some of the work that's being done for the climate action strategy. So again, like I said, it's informational to me, but I do commend staff for getting out into the public and sharing that information.
Good, thank you. Ms. Black, are there any other seminars scheduled? I remember seeing a list one time, but I don't recall the dates.
Madam Chair, I don't have the specific schedule for those climate action sessions, but I believe that there are some additional ones scheduled, and Mr. Imhoff will be here this afternoon, and I think he could inform the commission.
Oh, okay, I wondered maybe if we could have Ms. Rodriguez call them to, I know they did a poster with all of them, maybe we can get a copy of that, and we can just flash it on the screen when.
I'll also look on our website and see if it's available.
Maybe it's on there.
Madam Chair.
Okay, great, thank you. Anyone else? No? We next move on to consideration for approving our minutes of August 11th, and I will entertain a motion to do so.
I'll move approval, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion concerning those minutes? Corrections, changes? None. Then all those in favor of approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Great. Motion carries 4-0. So our next item is our Director's Report and Board Supervisors Hearing Summary from Dr. Russell. Good morning again.
Good morning, Chair Brown, Commissioners. Pleasure to be here. Due to the hiatus that the board took for most of the month of August, the only board hearing to report on was yesterday's, since your last meeting. And there were a few items of interest, a couple of ag preserve contracts, setting a hearing for one of the next G appeals so that they can all be heard on the 21st of September. We amended Chapter 24A, which is our administrative fine ordinance, to make it explicitly clear that the director can name an alternate hearing officer, and also to make it explicitly clear that if we obtain in writing a agreement that the 45-day requirement for the hearing can be waived, that will allow us to, in certain circumstances, extend the timeline. In no manner of speaking does this give a violator the ability to avoid a hearing, but we have simply found that in some circumstances, scheduling can be difficult within the 45-day window, and so we have amended the ordinance to allow for an extension of that 45-day deadline. However, we set the hearing, not the violator. We also considered CREF acquisition grants, and the city of Goleta got some seed money for the continued purchase of some lots that they've been purchasing and hope to purchase more of. And then also a fairly sizable, several $100,000 went for the purchase of some land in the Ocean Meadows area out by the university. So that was that. And then the last item was, once again, the fifth or sixth hearing now on the Coastal Commission LUDC. We reported on our experience at the Coastal Commission meeting and got direction from the board, who felt that it would be good to have 4 public workshops, which are in the process of being scheduled, in the one in the Gaviota area, one in the Goleta area, one in Montecito, and one in the Summerland Carpinteria El Toro area. And those will take place. We will return to the board on November 2nd to report on that, and we may need to return to the board again a week later, depending upon when it is that the final staff report comes out from the Coastal Commission for their November hearing. We anticipate that the LUDC modifications will in fact be heard at the November hearing, although there is no guarantee of that.
Dr.
what I
Russell, when are you planning to go, when is the date of the Coastal Commission hearing in November?
Let's see, I'm not sure I have that date. Perhaps Diane has that date.
Okay. And will there be someplace on the county's website of where the 4 hearings are? I mean, you're going to be advertising that in that way. Is there any other way you'll be letting the community know?
Madam Chair, first of all, to your first question, the Coastal Commission will be meeting the week of November 15th, so the week prior to Thanksgiving week. We will definitely be posting the location and times for all of the workshops on our website. We'll also mail all of the community groups that we believe are interested in any of the interested parties that have participated to date. So we'll do as thorough a job as we can, stopping short of noticing every single property owner in the coastal zone.
Okay, great. Thank you. Dr. Russell, also the board considered the UCSB's long-range development plan, the agreement.
Pardon me, I neglected to mention
No,
that.
that's
Yes,
okay, I know.
and Diane played a central role in that negotiation, and the board approved a series of 4 agreements, which I understand were also approved by the city of Goleta last night, which then now leaves the regents to consider the same 4 agreements.
And are any of these documents, I know there's been some community interest in this, what was approved, is it on the board's agenda? So one can go and look on the Board of Supervisors website and see what they considered? Ms. Black?
Madam Chair, that's correct. We did post a staff report along with the 4 attached agreements and some attachments describing the long-range development plan that's on the board's agenda materials for yesterday's hearing.
Okay.
So the board did approve a mitigation and implementation settlement agreement. That's a 3-party agreement with UCSB and the City of Goleta that addressed housing enrollment and traffic issues. They also approved a 2-party agreement between UCSB and the County of Santa Barbara for 3 separate agreements in 3 separate areas, including law enforcement, mainly around the staffing of the Foot Patrol Office, fire protection, emergency services, to deal with the fire services to UCSB, and I think we really made some gains through the agreement with staffing issues, both to address current needs and future needs as a result of the long-range development plan implementation. And then finally, for Isla Vista, both in terms of circulation improvements, we secured a commitment to fund $3.6 million worth of circulation improvements in Isla Vista, plus participation in the county's permit parking program for Isla Vista and some other social programs within Isla Vista that the university's been active in for the last 20
good.
or so years.
Good, great.
So I think we, the county came out fairly successfully in the negotiation process, and we're quite pleased.
Good, thank you. Commissioner Cooney?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Black, with regard to the agreements, I didn't have a chance to hear that part of the hearing yesterday, but I knew there was some community concern that the county might be giving up some of its jurisdiction to review future housing that might be proposed by the university. Could you clarify that?
Madam Chair and Commissioner Cooney, essentially the agreement provided for the County of Santa Barbara to support the long-range development plan before the Coastal Commission. And it also had provisions that didn't preclude the county from commenting on and even challenging housing projects into the future, you know, as the details are known and are different than what we understand today. But there are some consequences to that. One of the provisions of the agreement is funding for circulation improvements, and the negotiating team did not agree with UCSB's estimate of peak hour trips that would come from the long-range development plan, but we used that estimate as a basis for the initial mitigation required for UCSB's development, with a very extensive monitoring program that would allow us to essentially check their assumptions, and if their assumptions didn't hold true, then UCSB would be responsible for either reducing trips to the level that they had projected in their EIR or mitigating those at a pretty significant level, basically the GTIP, the combined average GTIP level of the city and the county, which is about $14,000 right now per peak hour trip. So if the county or the city were to challenge or otherwise significantly delay the implementation of a housing project that would keep that balance of peak hour trips within the campus, we would essentially be deferring the payment of those fees. So there's some consequence. It'll be a weighed decision, I think, on behalf of the city and the county, but it's certainly not precluded.
And is there the base year for that, for establishing, is it the year of the EIR?
It is. It's
So-
based upon the peak hour trip baseline projected or included in the EIR.
Okay.
So I think it's about 2008 numbers.
Oh, good, okay, that's great. Okay, anything else, Dr. Russell?
Yes, just two
Thank you.
small things. One, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Commissioner Cooney for participating in our long-range planning director interview process. We interviewed several candidates, and there were some good ones, and there may be an announcement soon about that. And finally, I'm sorry that I couldn't attend in person today. I really wanted to be there for the housing element. It's very, very important. But there are some discussions this afternoon with Greco Oil Company that I have to be part of and that could not be rescheduled. So sorry about that, but I'll be watching with interest
Good.
to the extent that I
Well,
can.
we're glad you're going to be with Greco. We know that that's important. Commissioner Valencia, excuse me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Russell, sometime back, this is a different question. Sometime back, the county built a new fire and sheriff substation in the 4th District, and there's been a lot of talk about the architecture and the design of that. We're very concerned about the future jail should Proposition S pass. And would the 4th District in design review or planning commission have an opportunity to comment on the design of that facility?
That's a very good question, Commissioner. I'm not sure I know the answer. Diane, do you know the answer?
Madam Chair and Commissioner Valencia, I'm not sure that the process of reviewing that particular facility has been fully thought out, but I will certainly let the Sheriff's Department and General Services know that at least a trip to the North BAR would be a good idea in this
I think a
particular
very
instance.
good idea. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Dr. Russell. Okay, we move on now. Ms. Black, do you have anything you'd like to add to anything that he said? No, okay. Then we move on to our consent agenda item, and we have one, and this is in the 3rd District. Commissioner Brooks, how would you like to proceed?
I think I am ready to make the motion,
Okay.
keeping in the consent agenda.
Okay. Why don't you
Okay,
go ahead and
so-
do that?
All right, I just will make the motion that we accept the consent item.
Okay, we're going to follow staff's recommendation. We need to read it into the record, excuse me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The following is the hearing on the request of Ron Carlington, Manager of the Office of Real Estate Services for General Services Department, to consider case number 10 GOV 11, application filed on August 11th, 2010, for determination that the proposed grant conveyance of the conservation easement for the California tiger salamander, CTS, for the purpose of supporting the environmental value of wildlife habitat, open space, and productive farmland and agriculture activities is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
Okay, thank you. And before I get a second, do we have any public testimony on this item? None? No, okay. Thank you. And then I'll entertain a second.
I'll second, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any further discussion?
Madam Chair, I have just a question. This property will go off the tax rolls then because it goes to, it will still stay on the tax rolls?
Mr.
Okay.
Carlentine, would you perhaps,
Madam Commissioner Valencia. The answer is yes, it would stay on the tax roll.
it's just an easement across the property, I
Right.
guess. Right. Okay. Anything else? Okay, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you. Motion carries. And we'll move on to our next agenda item. And do we need to take any action on that, or that's been dropped from the agenda? That's number one, the appeal. Read it into the record then?
Madam Chair, we should have Ms. Rodriguez read
Okay.
it into the record, and then the commission can accept the withdrawal of
Okay.
the item.
All right, thank you. Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The following is the hearing on the request of Brian Troutwing on behalf of the Blue Skies Mobile Home Park homeowners and named appellants to consider the appeal 10 APL 13 appeal filed on June 1st, 2010 of the director's decision to approve 09 LUP 332 and acknowledge that the California Public Utilities Commission is the appropriate agency for CEQA compliance on this project, and the California Public Utilities Commission filed a notice of exemption on July 20th, 2009 pursuant to California Environmental Quality Act Sections 15061B, 3, 15301B, 15301C, 15302C, and 15304F.
Okay. Thank you. Then I will make a motion that we accept the withdrawal. I'll look for a second.
I'll second.
Okay, and I want to make sure that we have no public comment. Probably not. All right, thank you. So any discussion? None. Thank you. Then all those in favor of accepting the withdrawal of this particular agenda item, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Motion carries 4-0. Okay, we move on to agenda item number 2. And Ms. Rodriguez, if you'd read that one into the record, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The following is the hearing on the request of Leo Evans that the Planning Commission consider and make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors regarding case number 06 APL 39, application filed on October 20th, 2006 of the Planning Commission's approval of Development Plan number 98 DP 023, and to accept the prior environmental document 78 EIR 9 Addendum 2 Supplement 92 SD2 as adequate environmental review pursuant to sections 15162 and 15164 of the state guidelines for implementation of CEQA.
Okay, thank you. And ex parte and site visit disclosures, please. Commissioner Brooks.
Yes, I made a site visit with Mr. Evans several months ago.
Okay, thank you. I know that the commission heard this project some time ago, and is there any follow-on to any, Commissioner Valencia?
Madam Chair, I had a conversation with Mr. Zorovich concerning the project.
Okay.
And I believe I had a phone call sometime earlier in the year, but I just can't recall the contents.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Cooney?
Madam Chair, I did not have a chance to go back to the site. I recall it well from its prior consideration before the commission, and it does conjure up some frightening memories, so I'm hopeful we can resolve those today.
Thank you, and I'll just like to repeat what Commissioner Cooney said, that I did make a site visit when the commission previously considered this. All right, we'll move on to our planner, Mr. Zorovich, if you would like to present this to the commission, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the commission. Just a couple items before I get going in my presentation. First, administratively, you should have a staff report from Planning Development dated August 2nd. In addition, there's been several letters submitted, so I just wanted to kind of make sure you had those. 3 are from the appellant, Mr. Leo Evans, one dated August 3rd, and then 2 others, September 1st and September 3rd, 2010. In addition, you'll have a letter from the attorney representing the North Point Homeowners Association, Mr. Christopher Gunther, and that's dated September 2nd, 2010. And then lastly, there's a memo from myself to the commission in consultation with County Council dated September 7th, 2010. So hopefully you have all that information before you today. And then just a quick, before I give my presentation, a little overview. This appeal is a little probably atypical. It went to the board in 2007. And at the board, they returned it back to the Planning Commission. They're seeking your input on, specifically on condition number 13, which deals with the Homeowners Association issue. Following the Board of Supervisors hearing, there was a facilitation meeting to try and see if there was a resolution could be found. Ultimately, one was not achieved. And so it returned to the Planning Commission 3 other times in the spring of 2007. Ultimately, in June, it was dropped from your agenda. With no resolution in sight, and kind of sent the 2 parties on their way to try and come up with a resolution. And so since that time, we're still at an impasse, but we're decided to bring it back at the appellant's request. So,
Commissioner Cooney?
Mr. Zorovich, before you get started, on that point of the current status of the project before us today, we're still back at that point where the Board of Supervisors which had taken the matter before it, had referred it back to the Planning Commission for input, further advice on the project, but technically it's before the Board of Supervisors, isn't that right?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Cooney, it is. Yeah, that's correct. It is before the board with your input back to them, a recommendation for specifically on condition 13.
All right, so we're not going back and looking at the other issues, for example, the issue of environmental review and whether that was adequate. That's been resolved.
That was resolved at the Planning Commission. You ultimately made a recommendation to approve the project was approved. The board took a look at it, but is just seeking your input solely on the condition 13 wording.
But to the extent that a proposed change to condition 13 raises environmental issues again, we're not precluded from opening those up and discussing them, are we?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Cooney, no, I don't think you are.
All right, thank you.
And then just one last thing, in talking with County Council, the recommendations listed in the staff report of the September one, there's several listed, but really I think what we're asking you to do is the last recommendation, and that to the Board of Supervisors that the appeal be upheld. So the other ones related to CEQA and the development plan should probably be dropped from the list of recommendations today. All right, with that, let me, my presentation, I'm basically going to go over the project just quickly to kind of give you a reminder of what it entailed, and then I'll go into the issues that were discussed in the September 2nd staff report. The North Point project is located essentially, east is Orchid Road Highway 135, west is Orchid Road 135, to the east is Bradley Road. The actual North Point project is sandwiched, if you will, between Foster Road to the north, Union Valley Parkway to the south. Hummel Drive kind of bisects the entire project. Mariposa Homes is located here, which was part of the map. But really we're focusing on just the North Point project. A little closer view of the project area. Here's the project site. Hummel Drive, the project site would be served by two roads. One would be North Point Circle, and the other one would be Parkview north to from off of Hummel Drive. And the retention basin is located here, just kind of northeast of Hummel Drive. There's other amenities of the North Point project. Here's the existing condominiums. Here's some tennis courts. There's a swimming pool area. Little closer view of the actual project site. It is vacant right now, fairly disturbed biologically. Here's some of the existing North Point residences to the west and to the north. Again, here's some of the amenities in the open space as well. This kind of shows in yellow, maybe you can see it, the lots that were recorded as part of the North Point project. Here's an actual map, copy of the map for the North Point project. This is what was being considered now as the last phase. It's actually listed as Unit 3, Phase 4. For my discussion, I may just consider it or discuss it as the last phase. The two are synonymous with each other. As you can see, it is the last phase to be built out, and it kind of shows the proximity of all the other units in the North Point development. The project that consisted of a final development plan, essentially effectuating or building out the map that was already been recorded for these 32 townhomes. The townhomes consist of 12 two-bedroom units, 1,671 square feet each in size, and then there's 23 bedroom units, a little over 1,800 square feet in size. Development plan also included some open space amenities, a picnic table, park benches, landscape plans, elevations, floor plans. The developer's indicated he's going to build these units to be as close as they can to resemble the existing. This is just a picture of one of the existing North Point townhomes. Just to give you an idea of what the project looks like. This is kind of a streetscape view of one of the existing North Point streetscapes as well, to give you a sense of what the project ultimately, when it builds out, will look like. So just a little bit of background, and I know I've already touched upon this a little bit. In October 2006, the Planning Commission, through the planning process, approved the project with revised condition wording. The condition wording gave the applicant the option of either annexing to the existing HOA or to enter into a mutually acceptable agreement with the existing HOA that included provisions for maintenance or temporary construction and access, and then also future control, management, maintenance, and repair of all shared common areas, amenities between the owner and the future project applicants and the association. This language actually came from the applicant as a way, in an attempt to come to some resolution. The original language just required the applicant to form his own HOA and pay his pro rata share of the repair and maintenance of the 2 roads I identified and the retention basin. But in an effort to move his project forward, he ultimately submitted this wording to the Planning Commission, which ultimately the Planning Commission approved with the project. Later on, the project was appealed. Essentially, the developer expressed some concerns with the financial conditions of the North Point HOA regarding upkeep and maintenance, stating that there was some grossly unfair, his project would, if he had to annex to it, would have a grossly unfair burden upon his owners of the new constructed units. As a result, the applicant requested that condition of approval, number 13, be revised to allow him to form his own HOA. And then, like I said, the new HOA would pay its pro rata share of repair and maintenance of the roads, Parkview North and North Point Circle, and the detention basin. So that was been an impasse for several years. And so the main disagreement, again, and that's why the board was looking for your input, is this disagreement between the existing HOA and the applicant. And the disagreement is whether the new development should be required to contribute to the ongoing repair and maintenance costs of the North Point open space amenities. The North Point HOA believes strongly that the occupants of the new development will use the amenities. Basically, it's close proximity of the new development to the existing development, and therefore should share in their upkeep. The applicant, however, believes the expenses are unrelated to the amenities at issue, and he believes that the cost of annexing to and having to pay for some of these would be an unfair burden placed on future residences. So to kind of summarize from our staff report, the project is at an impasse. It's just not moving forward. They've tried for several years to work out some kind of agreement, and they just haven't been able to do this. So typically, P&D does not become involved with the private HOA matters. Certainly, there are several zone districts which require a homeowners association and ultimately CC&Rs. P&D does review those CC&Rs, typically, though, for just to ensure that there's consistencies with our ordinances and policies, so that there's nothing in the CC&Rs which would conflict with our land use development code or policies. How much people pay for what and who pays what and when, we don't typically become involved with that in our review. So as a result, we see the project has been stalled, and so the revisions to condition number 13 that the applicant is seeking, we believe will allow him at least to move his project forward. And so with that, we've recommended, again, I think initially statement, forget the first 3 recommendations, and really what we're looking for is that you recommend that the Board of Supervisors uphold the appeal and approve the project with the recommended changes to condition 13. And those should also include the changes reflected in the September 7th memo from staff. Thank you. That concludes my presentation.
Any questions from commissioners of Mr. Zorovich? Commissioner Valencia.
Madam Chair, maybe we should say what those recommended changes are exactly for the record.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Valencia, the changes, if you want, for everybody's benefit, I'll read them. It's additional language at the end of the condition, and it basically contemplates that if this project were to move forward and that it becomes adjudicated and that there's some settlement agreement, that the pro rata changes that are identified, or the pro rata share of costs that are identified in the condition language there could be some flexibilities if that in the settlement agreement or adjudication, a different share percentage was identified. And therefore, if it was something different than what's stated in the condition, the project would not necessarily have to return back to the Planning Commission for modifications to the condition language. Stating that, I'll state the suggested language. And it states, notwithstanding the above, if a court with jurisdiction over the matter adjudicates the issue of the relative share of cost that must be borne by the applicant and the homeowners association for the existing access roads and retention basin, and determines through a final judgment that a different formula must be applied, then the relative share shall be as set forth in the final judgment of the court. End of suggested changes.
And where are you reading that from? In our,
His memo.
oh, in the other
Mr.
separate
Chair,
memo?
Commissioner Valencia, that's from the September 7th, 2010 memo.
Okay, fine.
Do you have other questions, Commissioner Valencia?
No, that's fine.
Okay. Mr. Zorovich, my questions are from what was, are the only, let me back up here. Just in reading the language, I want to make sure that I understand what it is that we're recommending, in addition to the last sentence of this condition. It's that there's shared maintenance responsibilities for the certain parcels, which I'm not sure what those parcels are. Could you just describe those? Could you point those out?
Madam Chair, the parcels that are identified in that condition language are those 32 parcels that are identified for these lots which have unbuilt homes on them.
Okay, so, but you say provide for shared maintenance responsibilities for those particular parcels for the private open space. So the open space meaning just the open space for those parcels. Well, it says for the open space, I guess it's a different parcel.
Madam Chair, it would be for the private open space of the area that's identified in this
Okay,
last
okay.
phase.
Okay, the landscaping there too, for that parcel. And then it says, subject to approvals for flood control. Now, I don't understand that
It's
particular,
not clear to me either.
what you mean by subject to approvals from flood control. What are they approving?
Mr. Chair, or Madam Chair, the flood control language was reflected from a change in some of the condition language that was done at the hearing regarding some of the landscaping that they suggested changes in a condition letter, what they submitted right before the Planning Commission item. And so therefore, I think that language was carried forward and ultimately approved by the Planning Commission as part of the original, as their language. So if you wanted to, you could strike the flood control, because the flood control district would have no real purview over the landscaping in the common open space area.
Right, nor P&D and county council. I don't understand that. Does the subject to refer back to the shared maintenance responsibilities for the parcels and the landscaping? Sorry.
Madam Chair, I believe it's referring back to the CCNRs that we would normally look at to make sure they're consistent with the project conditions.
Madam Chair, that's correct.
Oh, okay.
Madam Chair, I have a
Okay,
question.
go ahead, Commissioner
Thank you,
Watson.
Madam Chair. Mr. Zorovich, so trying to understand this attachment B that you handed us today, is crux of the matter here the 23%? Is that what sticks in their throat?
Okay.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Valencia, so far there's been no real disagreement on the 23%. Council, I think, just was, had some concerns that if that 23%, hypothetically, in the event that if it was changed through a final judgment through the adjudication process, it's changed to 28 or 15, whatever percent you'd want to think about, that this language would allow that change to go forward without having to come back to the Planning Commission for a revision to the condition. There is no disagreement about the 23% right now.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Cooney?
Thank you, Madam Chair. What I see in the recommendation, Mr. Zorovich, is that staff is taking the position contrary to the existing homeowners association that the new development, the new portion of the development should pay some portion of the cost of establishing specifically the roads and the retention basin. We could talk about the other amenities, but I think the conclusion is that that there may be a way to prevent the new development owners from participating or using those other amenities. But clearly they're going to use the roads. Clearly they're going to benefit from the retention basin. And it seems from letters from the attorney for the existing homeowners association that the cost of establishing those should be taken into account, as well as ongoing maintenance. Whereas Mr. Evans feels he's only obligated to pay for a percentage of the maintenance and repairs. It appears the recommendation you're making sides with Mr. Evans on those issues. If I'm oversimplifying, I want you to straighten it out, but it seems to me at least one of the fundamental points of disagreement between the two sides has been that issue, and your recommendation comes down on one side of that dispute.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Cooney, you are correct. Essentially, our language is not taking the sides of how much to pay and what should be considered in the payments, but it is reflecting the owner has agreed that he would pay his pro rata share of the roads in the basin. And that was a language that you see that we originally proposed, and so he suggested that works best for him because it doesn't require annexation. Trying to have the two parties resolve it is resulted in an impasse and a stall in the project. So we are seeking that the language go back to original recommendation from staff of the payment of just the roads in the basin.
Ms. McMaster.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Cooney, and the reason that we're taking that position is because case law establishes that if you have a property that has an easement referenced on a map, that they do have a right over that easement, and that would be the roads, that position's consistent with the case law. So that's why we don't feel he would have to purchase an easement over the roads. And the basins, I think a court would come down the same, that would be an implied easement he already owns, so he would not have to purchase that separate from the maintenance responsibilities.
Well, I don't want to complicate it from a legal standpoint, Ms. McMaster, but the problem I have with that argument is that this portion of the pie, if you will, this slice of the pie, was originally approved as an integral part of the entire development. All of the development was benefiting from the roads that would be developed, the retention basin, and the other amenities. Through history, a lot of history, bankruptcies, changes of ownership, this last piece of the pie is being developed separately. There's no question about that. The issue that causes me a problem, however, is that the original contemplation of the county that everything would be done out of one pot of contributed funds has been upset. And now what we're doing is treating this last piece as a neighbor, as if it was unrelated to the original project. And we're saying the case law that applies to a neighbor's use of an easement is what we're going to apply here. And we're sort of abandoning the concept of a unified development, which was the subject of the original environmental review and everything else. So that's the only reason. I understand your point, and I guess what I'm saying is maybe that doesn't really hold water. But we're probably going to end up saying to the existing homeowners association, if you agree that that's an issue, maybe your resolution is in court rather than with the county planning department.
Okay, no other questions from commissioners. We have some speaker slips. Thank you. Okay, our first speaker will be Mr. Evans. All right, then how about Mr. Walker?
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
I think it's been about 3 years since the last time I was here.
Right.
Didn't expect to be back, but here we are. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I also wanted to thank Mr. Zorovich for keeping us informed and soliciting our input on this. We did provide a presentation of a few slides, if that's available.
Sure.
Mr. Walker, could you tell us your position with the HOA?
I'm on the board of directors. I currently serve as treasurer. I've been working this issue for the past 5, although it seems like more years.
Thank you.
The whole annexation situation. I'm not going to speak for Leo or put words in his mouth, but I can kind of sympathize with where he's coming from. In my day job, I'm a government engineer, and I work on developing and installing transmitter systems and things like that at Vandenberg Air Force Base to support rocket launches. And it is positively bewildering, all the conditions and people and organizations you have to satisfy even to dig a trench and put cables in it and things. And my life would be much simpler if I didn't have to satisfy all those people. But the reality is that we impact things when we build things and develop them and install them. And I'm sure Leo would be much happier and his life would be simpler if he didn't have to deal with the impacts of those things. But there is an impact here. This is an overhead view similar to what Mr. Zorovich showed of the village of North Point. Could I borrow your pointer, sir? And you know that the new development is over here. The existing development is 107 units outlined there. We have about between 300 and 400 people living there in our association. I've lived there for 17 years. Over here, this is one of the major points of contention we have. We have an extensive set of amenities here: tennis courts, basketball courts, volleyball courts, a barbecue area and picnic area, pool. The tennis courts and the pool area are locked and exclusive to members who have keys. However, it seems obvious that as the new residents move in, they will probably make friends, I would hope, with the existing residents, and so there will be additional usage of these amenities as they let them in there as their guests. That's an impact that has not been recognized. There will be a direct impact, as we believe that since it's right across the street and very appealing, there's going to be usage of this whole green area, which we pay a great deal to maintain, basketball courts and so forth. Could I get the next slide, please? Thank you, Mr. Zorovich. Again, this is a little closer view of the plot there, the new units. As you can see, they are actually closer than most of our membership to this green area here, and it's going to be a natural attraction. Next slide, please. This is a view from our green area here, looking out towards the properties to be developed. This is Leo's area here. Actually, it's an awesome place to build units. I would probably be considering buying one myself if it were going to be annexed into the HOA. But this is, you can see the close proximity here. It's literally right across the street. Mr. Evans has used the term standalone a great deal. There is no way anyone could consider this standalone other than in the perhaps legal and financial sense. The physical proximity and the attraction of the area means that it does not really stand alone. I mean, unless there were a brick wall erected there, which is not feasible because he needs to share our roads. Next slide, please. So this gives you an idea of the distance across there. It's about 20 yards over to the area where the new development would be from our major amenities. Next slide, please. This is looking the other direction, down the hill from Leo's property, and you can see how attractive this looks here. You have the tennis courts, a large green area, children's playground equipment, volleyball courts, basketball courts, the pool over here. And surely, I understand it's not the Planning Commission's job to ensure fairness, but Mr. Evans would be getting a great deal of value in terms of saleability of his units versus if this was bare dirt and weeds over here. And I think the new owners would be rather dismayed to find out that they're not entitled to use any of this. And there is no practical way that we have of keeping them from using it. So what we have asked is for some mitigation, you know, in the upkeep and maintenance of this, a certain amount of buy-in. Earlier this year, we finally got down to giving Mr. Evans some figures. Those were, from our standpoint, put together quickly and a starting point for negotiations, and we never got a reply on that. Next slide, please. This is another view from the property, the northern part of Leo's. You can see how close it is and how it's, I mean, it's clear, as Commissioner Cooney said, that this was intended to be one unified development. That's the way it was planned, approved, and now to pretend that we can make this area on this side of the street stand alone and it will have no effect on the rest of North Point, it doesn't seem like common sense to me. And it obviously goes beyond the wear and tear on the roads and the use of the retention basin. And we don't have any dispute with that. We're satisfied with the 23% that has been assigned to that, although we also believe there is some impact fee that should be applied. But the main contention we have is that we're going to have a lot more traffic and use of our open spaces and our amenities, and Mr. Evans is not willing to even negotiate impacts for those, or just as important, being able to control the use of those things. For example, if there's vandalism and it's a member of our association, we have the ability to fine them. We would have no control over what the new owners do on our property. Next slide, please. And a lot of this goes back to the original argument that Leo made as far as the older units requiring more maintenance, which I don't dispute. They would require and do require more maintenance than new ones. However, that kind of seems like a red herring to me because, as our attorney, Mr. Gunther, pointed out in his letter to you, the Department of Real Estate would have to review this before the units were allowed to be sold. If there was a significant maintenance differential of 20% or more, they would require variable assessments if these units were annexed into our association. In other words, the new owners would not be paying to maintain the old units. It simply would not be allowed to happen. So again, I think, and Leo would have to speak to his motivations, but I think the issue here is not a burden on the new owners. It's simply minimizing what he has to do to get his project built. As I said, I'm sympathetic to that. However, you have 300 or 400 people who are going to be very significantly affected by this development. So what I'm here to ask of you is to maintain the current wording of approval condition 13 and require him to come to an agreement with us for that purpose.
Commissioner Valencia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Walker, you spoke of 3 items that are concerned to you: traffic, vandalism, and the maintenance of old units. And you've given us a good description of why vandalism, you'd like to have the right to apply fines all the way through and work that. And that I agree with that. Secondly, the old units, you told about the maintenance that may be required, and you understand that he would not have to pay for the old units. They'd have some kind of agreement. But the traffic, you need to expand more on the traffic. What is the thing that stands out on the traffic and on the roads?
Well, both on the
And
roads.
use a marker, please, to show me which.
Yes. Leo's project is completely dependent on access over our roads. This is Hummel here, and this is the extension North Point Circle that goes to the rear entrance. This is Parkview North, and this is the front entrance, which is near Foster Road here.
Yes.
These are the roads that we would be sharing. There's no contemplation of him sharing maintenance or upkeep of these other roads within the complex. His residents would have no reason to use those roads.
Thank you. That clarifies it in great detail. It's only the roads that he would be using.
That's
in
correct.
this. Thank you very much. That clarifies it. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Walker, I have a question for you. Would it be possible that because of the amenities, that rather than being annexed into your HOA, that there could also be a pro rata share put into the agreement for the maintenance of the amenities?
Madam Chair, that is what we've been trying to negotiate the past 3 years.
Right, but it looks
Exactly
like you're
that.
asking for sort of an impact fee that looks to the past rather than the maintenance fees, which sort of looks to the future.
We broke out both set of costs and gave them to Leo, and we said, if there's to be an impact fee, this is what we would base it on. However, none of those costs were ever intended to be non-negotiable. I mean, maybe not negotiable down to nothing, but.
But an
the-
impact fee, in my way of thinking, assumes that it's something that occurs in the past, and it's something that he's responsible for because of his existing conditions. It would seem to me that any sort of maintenance would look at, as soon as these projects, these townhouses are built and sold, that there would be a maintenance fee assigned as of that date, rather than, $50 for each unit based upon something that's occurred up until the sale.
I would agree that the operation and maintenance shared costs are the primary thing. Impact sort of acknowledges the value that is added to the project because the stuff is there and we've created it and maintained it all these years, and now he gets the advantage of having that there. It adds to the saleability of his units.
Okay, all right.
We're willing to negotiate on that.
All right,
though.
thank you. Any other questions for this speaker? No, Commissioner Brooks.
I'm just looking at, actually, probably it's not for the speaker, but staff
Okay.
or the speaker, whoever. I'm looking at our original staff report, and I'm looking at the original language of condition 13. So what I'm looking at is exactly what was discussed when this came before the commission 3 years ago. So the amenities such as the pool, the different courts were not included in that. I mean, all this refers to is the access road and the retention basin. Is that correct? So,
Madam Chair.
because I
Commissioner
wasn't
Brooks-
on the commission back then, so I just want to make sure I'm looking at the right thing.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Brooks, that is correct, that we just identified the roadway and the basin, kind of as county council reasoned why earlier, but we did not contemplate all the other amenities such as the fair share cost of swimming pools and tennis courts and playground equipment. And that's why, in the language, it was kind of called out that the existing North Point HOA, because of the project's close proximity to all of those, they were seeking that those also be included in, besides just the roads and basin.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Walker. Our next speaker is Deborah Merkley.
Hello, Madam Commissioner and Commissioners. My name is Deborah Merkley. I currently serve on the board for North Point. I've been on the board for 2 years. I have owned a home in North Point since 2001, and I am here from a slightly different perspective, although I agree with everything that Mr. Walker has said. Currently, I do not reside in my residence at North Point, but I still own it. So I believe that I have a very strong vested interest because this is my investment for my future. So I continue to serve on the board and keep kind of an eye on what's going on. And I've kind of watched the development of this whole annexation discussion since the beginning of time, since I was a member there. And I have a lot of concerns. Just as Mr. Walker pointed out, yes, we do have the discussion about the roadways, about the retention basin, but I think it's a very significant point to discuss the fact that this is going to have a very large impact on our community. Our community has already kind of changed with the growing times and economy as more people have lost their homes to foreclosures. More people are moving out of our community, like myself. They rent out their condominiums. So we have a little bit less control about the people that are coming into our community. We have a large impact from the community people around us. As Mr. Walker pointed out, we have had vandalism in the past. And despite the fact that some of our amenities are actually fenced in, people still find a way in. And we would be very concerned about the financial impact that this would have to us over time. We would not have the ability to impose fines on people and make sure that our home and our community retain their value. And that's part of why I invested in North Point in the first place. So again, about the whole annexation and the way that the development was originally planned, we look at it also as a way that it was supposed to be all one development. And so the discussion about the impact fee came into the fact that the last phase would be part of that. They would get the benefits of having that retention basin and those roads. So in the meantime, like Mr. Walker said, we've continued to maintain our roads, and over time, our homeowners association has gone through various issues of its own, including low reserves and whatnot, and we've worked very diligently as a board over the last few years to retain and build our fees back up, and we have even put a significant amount of money back into our roadways and maintaining the retention basin, but that also goes about all the amenities. So we have spent a significant amount of time in our homeowners association meetings discussing what annexation is, what are the benefits, and so we feel that there would be a lot of other things that could financially impact us as 32 more homes come and build into our community.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Catherine Cromer, please. Cromer. Excuse me.
Hi, I am Catherine Cromer. I am part of the board for the Homeowners Association, and I have lived there for 12 years and still live there. And one of the reasons that I moved there is because I was a single mom. I have 3 children. They're now adult children, but in the beginning they weren't. And it was a wonderful community, still is a wonderful community. And so I have to say to you that with the new development that is coming up, one of the draws is going to be it's walking distance to a high school, it's walking distance to a junior high school, and it's walking distance to an elementary school. So all this being said, it is going to be full of families, or I'm hoping so. Now, if I can figure out how to use this, I don't know how to use it. I'm going to show you where I live.
Wait, you need to stay the speaker. Mr. Zorovich will help show you.
Just push this button here and point it. This
Oh,
red
I
button.
thought I did.
There
Okay,
you go.
I live right here. I'm nervous. I live right there. And this, I live on Parkview. So I would like to also address the impact of this standalone development just from my personal perspective. Going to the schools, you're going to be going from this development, you're going to go right in front of my house. This is going to be cars, it's going to be bicycles, it's going to be walkers, and I'm not complaining about any of this, but it is going to have its ongoing impact. I don't think it came up, but Rigetti High School and St. Joseph are catty-corner to each other. So there's a lot of traffic. There's no access going to the schools coming back this way. Union Valley Parkway is right over here, and that will have its own impact going through to the freeways. But getting back to what I see every day is I see people walking their dogs. I see kids playing and laughing. I see kids playing on the basketball courts, on the children's swings and slides. This is going to increase in activity, and we can't pretend that the new development is standalone. We can't pretend to do that. It's going to have all kinds of extra traffic. I don't know what else to say other than there will be more cars parked in front of my house. There are going to be more high school children playing on all of our, this is like Toastmasters. There's, my time's running out. It is going to have an impact. It is not standalone, and I'm not an attorney, but what I can say to you is that the original purpose of developing that property all in the same homeowners association is really what makes sense here. And if we can't make that make sense, we're going to end up in court.
Thank you. Mr. Gunther, please.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner and Commissioners. I really just want to emphasize what these North Point residents are saying to you. From a legal standpoint, this has been a battle for them for some time. I've been involved for some time. I think it goes beyond whether or not Mr. Evans has a right by reference to a map, to an easement. What it goes to is the practical application of that reference to the map. And the reason I say this is because we've never denied Mr. Evans access. This project from the very beginning is part of the North Point development. And yes, he has the right of access, but in reality, that access is limited by what was intended when that map was first recorded. And that was that access was conditioned upon annexation into this association. Now, that said, we've been willing, and the members of the board have negotiated in good faith with Mr. Evans to try to facilitate a standalone association despite the fact that we believe it's not the way to go. But we've been willing to negotiate it and limit the agreement to the areas in which he is going to, we know, impact. The two roads, the water basin, and the common area amenities that are there and are going to be used. There's no way of preventing them from coming on those properties. Now, that said, and it was raised by Mr. Walker very nicely, how are you going to control that? It's not just the 23%. If it was just the 23%, that would make it easy, but it's not. The association has to have a means by which to collect that 23% from the association or those members. How are you going to do that? Are you going to go to court every time we have an assessment? That would be pretty difficult to do. Second of all, how are you going to control the use of those amenities? I think it's pretty well established that the close proximity of this particular project, those residents, those future residents will use the North Point common areas. They will use the roads. That's an impact. How are you going to control them? Those are not public roads. They're not like the roads to the east of the boundary that are public roads that the county has some control over. These are areas we have to control. And I don't know, I'm sure the commissioners have all seen CCNRs and have said, well, boy, I don't want to look at those. But those are meant, they're a purpose. There's a purpose behind those. They're the constitution of this association. They're the use restrictions. They're the things that have to be enforced, and they are made in a fashion to allow enforcement easy. So you don't have to go to court every time your neighbor puts up something that you don't like. You go to the board and you get approval to put it up, or you recognize the impacts it's going to have on you, you make a decision. Internal control is what is needed here. Now, the latest, when I arrived here this morning, I saw the memorandum which adds some language to the condition 13. In my opinion, the language adds nothing, adds absolutely nothing. The only thing it does do is it focuses you on what is probably the future of this whole thing, and that is litigation. It's pointing you in the direction to send these residents into litigation with this developer. Wow. That's not what is intended here. What is intended here is for you to take into consideration these impacts and try to develop a formula that works for everybody. And whether we annex or we share these common area amenities, the association has been reasonable. We've approached it. We've never even received a response from Mr. Evans to our impact fees and our estimates of the repair and maintenance costs for the future. And so I don't think he's really given it the chance that it deserves. With that, I do want to open it up to any questions you may have. I did present my arguments in writing to you in advance, hoping that you would have a chance to look at those and have any questions for me. I'm happy to answer those.
Any questions for Mr. Gunther from Commissioners? Commissioner Cooney.
Mr. Gunther, I just want to make sure in all the paperwork we've received, and I'm getting more and more sympathy for our Superior Court judges who have to wade through these piles of contradictory arguments, but in essence, it's your position that the best situation here would have been annexation into the existing homeowners association, and the CC&Rs that control the existing owners would also apply to the new owners, and there wouldn't be any need to negotiate.
Correct.
The fallback position is that Mr. Evans forms his own homeowners association for his own development and contracts with the existing homeowners for the use of those facilities that are common to both. Areas of dispute, it appears, are what amenities those are. Is it just the roads and retention basin? And the second one I mentioned earlier, is there some cost factor that in effect catches up the new development with what the owners have had to pay up to now for building these facilities? Because it's one thing to seal coat every other year, it's another thing to build the gutters and so forth. Am I stating the essence of your position?
Yes, you are, and let me just elaborate a little bit on what we're talking about. When we talk about impact fees, there's no real formula for that. The way we have attempted to establish an impact fee, which is a payment for the value of what his residents are receiving when they move in. If they're going to be using the roads, those roads have a value. And so we've tried to come up with a reasonable value as an impact fee. We've also gone through our past, our operating budgets to determine what's going to be the future costs of repairing and maintaining those two roads. And we've then estimated, and we've used the 23% figure, which we believe is fair. It's based upon a pro rata portion, based upon the existing residents and the future number of residents of Mr. Evans' project. I hope I answered your question. Maybe I got a little bit far afield there.
No, I've read the letter you're referring to, dated March 1, 2010. You've broken it down on an overall basis and also a per unit basis, assuming 32 units. We're sharing those costs.
Correct.
So I think your position is clear. I just wanted to be sure I wasn't missing something.
Sure.
Thank you.
Glad to be of help.
Okay. Thank you. Mr.
Thank you.
Evans will be our last speaker.
This, as you're well aware, involves a piece of property that I own, where I want to put 32 units on it. Now, the question is, what are the issues here? There are three issues: the road, retention basin, and adequate open space. Now, what they're saying is that I have a right to use the road. And at the same breath, they say, but you don't have a right to develop. That's sort of contradictory. They had in their CC&Rs, the ability
that anybody connected there could come into the homeowners association without any cost or fees or obligations. They amended that somewhere in around 91 or 92. They amended it so nobody comes into the homeowners association, not with the board's approval, but with each individual homeowner's approval of that annexation. So the homeowners did away with this argument that they're now giving that it was intended. It probably was intended, but they fixed it so there was no problem in knowing whether you could come in or not. You could come in then only if you complied with what they wanted. So there's no longer a question of whether I can come in or if I can stay out. That's not the question. This development, they don't show you the full picture here. This development has 80 more units. And those units are on the same tract map. And on that tract map is delineated the roads, and they have the same rights that I have. Those roads are recorded with the deed. And they built and formed their association independently. They don't have anything to do with homeowners, and they've been successful. And they haven't infringed or trespassed upon the existing homeowner's property. They're down the block a little ways, but still they're a affordable housing development, and they would have a lot more children or young people. And if there was a possibility of somebody stepping on the existing homeowner's property, they would have been the ones that have done it. They haven't had that problem. There's a road that dead ends into my property, and traffic comes down from that road into the North Point development. And as far as I know, they haven't had any problems from their neighbors coming down and wanting to use the horseshoe pit. If I wanted horseshoes, I got plenty of land to build horseshoe pits. I don't believe that there's that many people that use horseshoes or volleyball. The crowd I'm coming up with on my development will be different. And they won't step on the grass. And the homeowners association is very territorial, and they won't allow it. If they have to build a 6-foot fence, it'll be more secure than the borders. So there's no question I can use it, but the question is I can't develop on it. I don't follow their reasoning. They want me to come into their association, and they want me to start paying into their association. I'm building a condo, it's competitive. I'm going to have 2 homeowner associations. It won't pencil out. I can give you an example of how critical that homeowners' dues is when you're trying to sell something. About 6 months ago, I went down to Ventura because there's a condo being sold in the Rice Ranch section. And I was going to bid on that piece of property. They usually sell in the $200,000 range. That property, when I was sitting there waiting to bid, that property was going to go for somewhere around $50,000. And I decided not to bid on it, even though I'd gone down there. The monthly homeowner dues was $400. And I thought paying $400 a month in conjunction with your taxes and whatever else didn't figure out. So you have the $400 payment going into the homeowners association for maintenance, and this homeowners association North Point is up to 280 right now and going, plus special assessments. When they build something, they've got to have fix a road or whatever. I don't know how they did it this time, but they'll have a special assessment. So you not only pay the $400, you pay for special assessments. Now, who manages the units on the bluffs above Rice Ranch Road?
Mr. Evans, I hope that you're going to be concluding pretty soon. Thank you.
Well, I didn't get a chance to.
Well, we'd like to talk about your project, not somebody else's project.
It's the same homeowner, it's the same management for both, Gotts and Associates. The Planning Commission may wonder why I'm here without an attorney. I had on my title policy that I had access to homeowners. There was no access problem. Why am I not entitled to representation? Because Planning Commission put a condition on my property that precluded me from getting represented by Chicago Title. Okay.
Okay, Mr. Evans, I'm going to give you another minute to conclude.
Besides having the access, there was another lawsuit, and the County of Santa Barbara entered into a settlement agreement with my predecessors in interest in this property, and they reached a settlement agreement in which they agreed to
Please conclude.
All right, thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. Are there any other speakers? If not, I will close the public hearing. Okay, would you please come up and provide a speaker slip so we know who you are? Thank you. You can go ahead and go to the microphone and just submit your speaker slip after the fact. Thank you.
My name is Diane Simon. I'm a owner at North Point. I've been there 20 years. I'm in Shady Lane, which was the last phase before this one to be built. We will be also really, really close. I just wanted to remind, I know you have the paperwork, the board, that there once was an annexation agreement on this piece of property. When Mr. Wilkes, who was the developer of 3B, which is mine, it included Phase 4. And the membership received a packet from the board with the amenities that he was going to add and hit the buy-in, which was very generous. There's a copy of it in your packet. And it did include Phase 4 that we're talking about now. So even back to when mine was built in 91, we were all told that Phase 4 would be annexed automatically. And we voted. We approved the pre-annexation agreement. We voted on it, and it was to be annexed. Mr. Wilkes had to file bankruptcy, and Midstate Bank took the property back in foreclosure, and then was sold to Mr. Evans. And that's why it didn't get finished like it should have, and was meant to. And I just wanted to tell you that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner
Excuse me,
Cooney.
Ms. Simons, Simons? Right. Is it with an S or?
Yes, Simple Simon.
Simple Simon, all right. Yeah, I just had a question about that because Mr. Evans raised the issue. Phase 4 consisted of his Unit 3, plus he says in his letter of September 3, there was an 80-unit.
Yes, that's Mariposa. That was another piece of the property that Midstate Bank, actually Mr. Wilkes owned there where Hummel crosses Union Valley, where you see these.
We have a pointer there. It would help us if you could point it to us.
That's Mariposa, right, John? All 4 of these corners sections were all originally to be North Point.
I see.
The original San Clemente group that purchased this purchased all of this. When Mr. Wilkes came in the picture to develop 3B here that I live in, he purchased this. This is lot 148, which that's another big issue I'd like you to read about in your paperwork. This corner and this corner. And this is lot 3 that North Point already owned. And North Point also owns this piece across the street of Hummel. There really is a lot of, this whole thing was once to be North Point. So then after the bankruptcy, Midstate Bank sold this to the self-help people that built Mariposa. This was more or less given, I believe, to the Aqua Center people. And so all that's left now of the original North Point project is Phase 4.
Oh, thank you. That helps a lot.
Okay. All right, thank you. So I'm going to close the public hearing now.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
may I make a couple of comments?
go ahead. Well, please, I'll give you a minute.
Thank you. The issue of the Mariposa townhomes as a separate development, yet it was part of the original North Point plan, was raised. That's about a quarter of a mile down the road.
Right.
The development there included a large green area, a clubhouse, children's playground equipment and stuff. They have their own amenities. They have no reason to come over and use ours. And the two are very isolated. Also, the issue of the homeowners association dues was raised. We're at $281.50 per month right now. We monitor HOA dues of similar size and amenities in the area, and we're right about at the median.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. Okay, I will close the public hearing now and bring it back to the commission for any further questions of staff. And if not, Commissioner Valencia, this is in your District, I believe.
Thank you, Madam
I'll
Chair.
turn over to you, how you want to
Well,
proceed.
this has been coming to us for some time. I recall the first time Mr. Evans came forward, and then the second time his daughter came forward for him and spoke on his behalf. And now he's back here again. And as I look at all the information and all that, I have to agree with the people from North Point that everything they say makes sense to me, you know. And I'd like to tell Mr. Evans that I wish he'd have built these units long ago, and I hope he builds them soon, because what he wants to build is a 3-bedroom, 1,800 square foot condo is in high demand, and he will sell those quickly. He should just quickly make an agreement with these folks and get on with it. I mean, it's a beautiful development. I've been there several times. I failed to mention that, but I don't think he'll have any, just like the Mariposa, I was hesitant about Mariposa in the beginning, but what a wonderful project that ended up being. I toured that, and the gardening that they do in the children care and some of the units, some people felt that because it was low income people, they wouldn't be clean. They took us through them. Immaculately clean, very nice people. North Point is an equally nice point. Now the Aquatic Center, if someday it gets done, you know, that'll be a nice project. I know they've been working on it, so we have deep respect for everybody who comes up there and gives us their opinion, and we don't try to contradict your opinion, Mr. Evans, but you spoke about other projects. You didn't speak about in detail about the 3 problems that you have here: traffic, vandalism, and old units, the maintenance thing, which Mr. Walker brought up. That's what you should have focused on, and you probably should have had representation. But now, as I see, I don't see any problem, and I think that we need to. And I just like to recommend to this commission that we go back to what our findings were last time and what our approval was last time. I'm not in favor of changing anything. Condition 13 still sits fine with me, and I hope that they can come to an agreement. If the project ever gets built, it'll be a credit to both. It'll complement the other project that's there. And with that, I pass it on to my fellow commissioners for comments from them.
Okay. Commissioner Cooney?
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I've thought deeply about this project because what I see is very common in the area of law that I used to practice, where parties both had very heartfelt positions that were inconsistent, and I think that's here. And what is concerning is the county's role. Obviously, I share Commissioner Valencia's desire that there be a quick settlement, that the parties get on. There have been some numbers suggested which break down to a very small amount per unit that the Homeowners Association is asking for if there is to be agreement. It's just a starting point, but I really think that that we should borrow from clearly established precedent. If a water district installs a main or a sanitation district installs sewer improvements and developments come online subsequently, they're expected to pay their pro rata share of the original development cost. And what I see here is Mr. Evans is unwilling to do that. He's treating his project as having nothing to do with his neighbors, and that's unrealistic, as the representatives of the Homeowners Board have pointed out. So I'm not in favor of making any changes unless we make it more clear that that the alternatives available to Mr. Evans are either annexation into the association or an agreement. And we could add all kinds of specifics to the agreement, saying it's subject to binding arbitration or otherwise, but that really is for the parties to work out. The most we can do is say, we think these financial issues have to be worked out before he can start development.
Commissioner Brooks?
when I made my site visit, I was very, very impressed with the existing development. I didn't even know it was there. I live in Vandenberg Village and hadn't been in there. Obviously, your homeowners association is doing what I could see, a very good job of maintaining, and especially in these very difficult economic times. You know, I applaud the homeowners association. My own community, we're dealing with homeowner association issues right now, or lack of homeowners association. And so I'm kind of sensitive because I'm looking at the role of what is the county's relationship. And, I have been told, in our own situation that, they're so separate, And so sitting here, I'm wondering, well, what can I can't do anything, about these homeowner issues, that the home association issues. I mean, it does have to be worked out. When I was not on the commission, when this came before the commission previously. So when I was doing my research and my study, I'm kind of looking at, this existing staff report, and I'm focusing on this idea that, the idea of paying the pro rata share for roads and the retention basin. That's all I was focusing on. It seems that as if but I don't think that's the issue. It's the use of the amenities. And when I go back into the conditions of approval, I don't see reference to those amenities. I see roads and the retention basin. So I want to make sure that I understand from my commissioners who have looked at this many, many times, are we dealing with the road retention basin part of this? Or are we saying that if we uphold the appeal, or if we don't uphold it, we're saying that the new development, has to be annexed in, and that those people do have to pay the full homeowner association fees
Madam
for
Chair.
all amenities.
Madam Chair, may I respond to
go ahead,
Commissioner?
Commissioner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, what we said last time, we said, you should join. There's a percentage that you'd have to pay into joining because of the basin, because of the amenities that were there, the swimming pool and the roads, all those things were mentioned. And at the previous meetings, we said, we also agreed that the loop was not included, and I just wanted Mr. Walker to say it again. He reiterated what was said at the other meetings, It was, and everything sounded reasonable, and that's why condition 13 was included in there. There didn't seem to be anything unreasonable that was added at the time.
Madam Chair.
And
Mr. Zorovich.
Sorry to interrupt, but staff, in consultation with county council, there was some concerns with regards to the open space amenities that you mentioned, all the other things, that maybe staff could not require some kind of maintenance provisions for those. It was clear that the roads and basin, there was a nexus, if you will, for that, but the other amenities were not a condition that we had. Now, if you look at the original condition, or the condition language which we were suggesting be omitted, that was language that was submitted by Mr. Evans to try and reach an agreement. Ultimately, he changed his mind. So if there's references there to other amenities, it's something in which the applicant had provided to us. We had ran it through county council, and it was supported at the time by both staff, council, and ultimately the planning commission. So that's why there's a little discrepancy in what amenities are listed. Some are which we feel we have the right to condition pro rata share cost for, and others that I think maybe were in question.
the things that I mentioned were mentioned as they should negotiate those in good faith. That's what we said.
Correct.
I agree with Commissioner Valencia. I just think that you just don't do a standalone and exempt the new project from the costs associated with the operation of and the maintenance for some of these amenities. And I do concur with Mr. Gunther and members of the board of the current homeowners association is the problems that could be potentially associated with having residents so close are unimaginable, and then you would have absolutely no way of controlling them. This, in my mind, is a part of this entire project and should be brought into the homeowners association. I just think to manage one complex is going to be easier than to try to accommodate a standalone that will create many problems for the current homeowners. So I agree with Commissioner Valencia, and I believe Commissioner Cooney as well, that we just maintain what was we originally approved, and not consider the change by staff, right? Commissioner Cooney.
As a matter of technicality, Madam Chair, I think that our choices are few today. If we don't agree with staff's recommendation, then we need to refer it back to staff. And staff has mentioned there's an issue with some part of what we had previously done. So while we may preserve the essence of that, it needs some.
Right, thank you. It needs to be some work, I agree. Right. So, Ms. McMaster,
Just for clarification, so we'd be going back to the old condition 13. Is that?
Commissioner Valencia.
Yes, we would be going to the old condition 13 with clarification from the staff. Mr. John, you wanted to say something concerning that clarification?
No, actually, I was just I want to make clear too, because I understand your sentiments as working on this project for now over 5 years. There's just this practical feeling that you want to roll up your sleeves and have them come together.
Right.
But as I also indicated, P&D, we just typically do not get involved with the cost of how much somebody's going to pay for this and what's the formula. And even Mr. Gunther suggested there's no formulas for some of these. And so while there's this real feeling to get involved with it, I think staff was recommending that we just allow the language to go forward as originally proposed. Granted, it may not be idyllic now, but it allows the project to move forward, so where maybe another venue, they can work out some of these other things. It's just a consideration that I express one more time, that it's not typical for us to get involved in this details.
I think, isn't that what Commissioner Valencia is proposing, that it's the original condition 13? Is that not, am I misunderstanding something here, Ms. Manuel?
Well, you're adding the 23% for the maintenance of the roads?
No, you could not do that.
Just for clarification, Madam Chair, sorry for the confusion. Let me back up. The language that we are asking the commission to uphold today was language that we originally submitted to your commission as the project. Ultimately, that language was changed to what is now on page...
What's submitted before us on the...
On page 1 of the staff memo dated August 2nd. That language that's shown as to be in strikeout form was language that was ultimately approved. It was submitted by the applicant in working with the HOA. So that language that you see as strikeout, that was not the original language. Sorry for the confusion. That was language which the applicant proposed and ultimately, though, appealed it, asking that he doesn't want that language in there regarding the mutual acceptable provisions. He's suggesting that he can't work out a mutual agreement. So therefore, rather than doing that, he would prefer to move forward with the original language.
All right, thank you, Ms.
So,
Black.
Madam Chair, since I'm confused, I bet there are other people in this
Yes,
room who are confused.
we're all not confused.
So, could we read the language that we're proposing to have the commission adopt today, or recommend that the board adopt? Just so it's very, very
Well, I
clear on
think
the
that,
record.
but isn't the issue is that we either have to not recommend what is...
Madam Chair, I think you can move forward today.
Okay, all right.
So if we could just read the language we believe meets at least the commissioners who have spoken's intent, I think that would help.
Again, sorry for my confusion. Okay, third time's the charm, perhaps. The language which I can read that Ms. Black identified is actually listed in the September 7th, 2010 memo that staff provided to your commission. And the language that we're asking the Planning Commission to recommend to the board is as follows. Prior to zoning clearance for development plan, the applicant shall form a homeowners association and record CC&Rs that provide for shared maintenance responsibilities by parcels 107-560-01 through 107-560-032 for private open space area, APN 107-560-033. The CCNR shall also include, by reference, responsibilities for all parcels to maintain property in compliance with all conditions of approval for the project. The homeowners association shall pay the existing North Point HOA for its share of the repair and maintenance to North Point Circle and Parkview North, existing access roads, and the existing North Point retention basin used by phases 1 through 4. The pro rata share shall be 23% of any such repairs and maintenance. Notwithstanding the above, if the court with jurisdiction over the matter adjudicates the issues of a relative share of costs that must be borne by the applicant and the homeowners association for the existing access roads and the retention basin, and determines through a final judgment that a different formula must be applied, then the relative share shall be as set forth in the final judgment of the court.
I'm going to take, before we do anything, because we've got, got a lot of signals from staff here, I'm going to just take a couple minutes for them to discuss things, and then we're going to take like a 3-minute break, and then we'll come back. Okay? Thank you. Turn it over to County Counsel, Ms. Van Mullen. We'll start with you.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, I just want to clarify, I think that as Ms. Black said, you can go forward today with your recommendation to the board. And what I believe I hear the commission saying is that you want to change staff's recommendation and that you want to take a motion to recommend that the Board of Supervisors deny the appeal and approve the project as originally approved.
Right. Okay. Is that where you want to go? Okay. Okay.
Okay, and that language, the original condition 13, is on the first page of the staff report. It's with the strike-through language. So that's what you're going back to, just what was originally before your commission and what went to the board.
Madam Chair, if at this time I could make that motion and get a second, then we can
Okay.
discuss more.
Commissioner Brooks?
I'll second it.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, and any further discussion? Commissioner Brooks?
Now that I'm looking at page 1 and 13, because I was going back into the original condition 13, which was exactly what, it was only for the roads and the retention basin. Is that language in B clear enough that that includes the amenities such as the pool?
It says amenities.
Okay. Of all shared common areas and amenities. Okay, so that's the pool and the courts and everything, and that's clear enough.
Perhaps County Council can address what amenities means here to answer Commissioner Brooks' question.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Brooks, you do have the discretion to change that language if you feel like it's unclear. I did think it addressed the common areas and the amenities. I mean, it does talk about mutually acceptable provisions between the owner and the HOA. But it's definitely within the discretion of your commission to change that language. And then what you would be doing is recommending denial of the appeal and recommending a modification to that condition.
Okay.
So it would not be what Mr. Evans is requesting. It would be a different language you'd be recommending the board adopt.
Okay.
All right, well, if my colleagues are satisfied that that specifically goes back to the original amenities, not just the amenities of the new phase, then I'll abide by your wishes if you think that's clear.
Well, I think that there are no amenities in the new phase. I think the amenities pertain to the...
Well, they're going to have a
previous
barbecue pit or something, but, something minor, I know, but...
Okay. Commissioner Cooney.
No.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the intent of the original paragraph 13, which is represented with the strike-through language on page 1 of our staff report, is that the parties need to work this out. Now, we're not saying that all of the amenities need to be shared in terms of cost. What we're saying is they need to work out an agreement that covers those, and they're free to say the swimming pool is not an issue, the other areas they can control are not issues, but the open space is an issue. In other words, we're basically saying to them, you've got to work this out, and to the extent that they are unable to work it out on some reasonable basis, I think we ought to be prepared to review to make sure that that the parties are working in good faith. Because what I don't want is for the homeowners association to say, now our agreement is required for Mr. Evans to develop, we're going to adopt an unreasonable position and stop him right here because we obviously are better off without that development. So I just want to state that concern. I really think what we have in terms of today's action is correct, but if at a certain point Mr. Evans goes back to Mr. Zorovich and says, you know, here's what gun is being held to my head, and Mr. Zorovich and the rest of staff feel it's unreasonable, I think we ought to be able to look at this again.
Council, you have any comment on that? On perhaps any language that, or what, I guess maybe for Ms. Black, what future action that, how would we do this? How would we consider this?
Madam Chair, I'm not sure that there's any particular way for you to retain jurisdiction over the implementation of this condition. That's really a staff level function to ensure that a condition's complied with, and if they can't comply with it, one of the parties will have to make an application for commission modification or consideration in the future again.
But that could
Or
overcome-
alternatively, as our language suggested, they can go to court to resolve this, which may be the ultimate path. But I don't think there's a way for us to just retain jurisdiction with the commission on this condition, particularly since the appeal's with the board at this point.
Commissioner Cooney.
And I'm not saying anything to disagree with Ms. Black. I wouldn't want to do that in the exercise of my diligence. But what I think we want to signal is that we really want a good faith negotiation to resolve this so that it doesn't force one of them to come back to the Planning Commission at a future time or to go to court, because that really indicates that reasonable minds have not been able to reach agreement. So I'm hopeful they can. Without changing anything in what we do today, I think basically whether they go to the Board of Supervisors or come back to the Planning Commission or go outside the planning system to court, eventually this is going to be resolved. So the parties really, I think, would be well advised to take the time and effort to resolve it now, even giving up something they think they have a right to in order to move on with the project. So that's free advice. It's not part of the condition, but I would love if we never saw it again. But I just want to say, if either party comes back to us with a modification of Condition 13, I'm prepared to look at it again.
Okay. We have a motion and we have a second, and I'm just wondering if we can, Ms. Rodriguez, if you could read the motion back to us since we've had some discussion. Do you have that written down? No. Okay. Oh, Council, why don't you read that back to us, please? Thank you.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, I believe that the motion that was made and seconded was to recommend that the Board of Supervisors deny the appeal and approve the project as originally proposed.
Okay.
Or, I'm sorry, originally approved by your commission.
Okay. Okay. If that's everyone's recollection, then Ms. Rodriguez, would you call the question, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Brooks?
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Valencia?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Motion carries 4-0.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. And I think what we're going to do now is, Ms. Black, we're going to take a break, take our lunch break a little early, and come back at 12:30. Is that okay? Good. Then we will see everybody back at 12:30 for the housing element. agenda item number 3. Ms. Rodriguez, would you please read that into the record?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The following is the hearing on the request of the Planning and Development Department to consider and make recommendations to the Board of Supervisors regarding case number 10, GPA 3, which includes A, amend the Santa Barbara County Comprehensive Plan through adoption of the proposed update to the housing element, and B, accept the final 2009-2014 housing element, negative declaration 10 NGD 15 as adequate environmental review for case number 10 GPA 3 pursuant to state guidelines for implementation of CEQA.
Thank you, and I welcome Mr. Eady, who will give the staff presentation.
Thank you, Chair Brown and fellow commissioners. Before I start with staff's prepared presentation today, I'd like to draw your attention to the staff memo that was distributed dated September 8th, 2010. This is to clarify that one of our tables, being table 2.13 in chapter 2 of the draft element, incorrectly cites the location of some county funding housing developments. The memo clarifies that the Central Plaza apartments are located in Santa Maria rather than Santa Barbara, and it's recently been brought to staff's attention that the Positano apartments are in unincorporated Goleta rather than the table currently identifies it as being in Santa Barbara. So those two locations will be corrected before the draft element is presented to the Board of Supervisors.
Thank you.
So transitioning into the presentation, today staff is asking that the Commission review and provide recommendations regarding the proposed 2009 to 2014 housing element. Staff's recommendation would be that the Commission recommend that the Board adopt the required findings for the project, including CEQA findings, adopt the negative declaration, and adopt a resolution approving the 2009-2014 housing element. Today's presentation will concentrate on four main themes. That is background for the housing element, current housing issues, the newly proposed housing element goals, policies, and programs, and the public outreach, state regulatory review, and environmental review conducted prior to today's hearing. As background to set the stage for the remainder of the presentation today, it's worth noting the background on state housing law. The reason for the current process that we're reviewing is that every 5 years, pursuant to state law, the county has to revise its housing element to identify an updated set of goals and policies which are specifically responsive to the current housing needs. It is also important to note that this will be likely the last 5-year update for the housing element. Recent updates to state law have allowed jurisdictions to choose to change to an 8-year cycle. The purpose of this is to align the update of our housing element with our regional transportation plan, and SBCAG has recently supported that option. So the next housing element for the county will likely be an 8-year cycle from 2015 to 2023. So as I said, the development of our new housing goals and policies is intended to center on what are the current housing issues that are facing the county right now. And those, first and foremost, are unprecedented changes in the economy versus the last housing cycle. Nationwide, the economy has experienced a significant downturn, and this has substantially affected the real estate and the housing market specifically. Locally, we've seen the result of that in that permit activity has slowed substantially. Staff has seen an increased number of requests for time extensions to keep projects alive that were previously permitted but aren't being actively built. On the upside, there has been an increase in affordability in North County. This primarily results from an influx of foreclosure-generated housing stock. But with limited credit availability, this has also limited the ability to make loans available for the purchase of these homes and also loans available for the development of new homes. In response to this turbulent economy, the county has made a significant effort to create a housing element that is responsive to this current economic climate. We've also made a substantial effort to refine the county's previous housing policies and goals to provide a more user-friendly element, one that's going to be easy for the public to understand, and one that's going to be easier for staff to implement. Another significant change that is unique to this housing cycle is recent changes to state law that directly affect housing. We've seen a recent influx of climate change related legislation, and a lot of these have directly tied differences in land use planning as a way to decrease greenhouse gas emissions, specifically through providing a better jobs housing balance in areas, which thereby reduces commuting distances, vehicle miles traveled, and the associated greenhouse gas emissions. Specifically, AB 32 and SB 97 have helped bring this to the forefront, but more specifically, Assembly Bill 2158 introduced new characteristics to how the state distributes its regional housing allocations. It linked the need for jobs housing balance to how housing is distributed regionally. And you can see the result of this dramatically from the last cycle to the current. So in 2003 and 2008, the county received a regional housing allocation over 6,000 units. This was 36% of the total regional housing distributed to our entire area. Change over to the current cycle, 2009 to 2014, and there was a reduction in units that is obviously because there's also been a pullback on the projected population increase with the downturn in the economy. But if you look at our relative distribution of housing versus the incorporated cities, we go from 36% of the region's housing allocation to 9%. And this reflects the state's new assertion that housing should be built where jobs are, and therefore a larger majority of the housing has been allocated to the cities. The county being predominantly a rural agricultural jurisdiction with smaller commercial centers has seen its housing allocation drop. One last change in housing element law, which is important to note, is that this is the first cycle in which counties are held directly liable for implementation of their programs. So this ties into our already stated desire to create a housing element that was more refined. But we also have to be cognizant of the fact that if we insert a program into our element, that we have to have the staff, the resourcing, and the intent to implement it. A major component of the housing element is to generate a land inventory that illustrates the county's ability to meet its regional housing allocation. We've seen that allocation, as previously explained, dropped substantially going into this cycle. And the county was able to find that it has more than enough existing zoning capacity to meet this allocation. Our allocation was 1,017 units, and versus with the use of current zoning capacity, projects that have already been permitted in this cycle, which we can count to our capacity, we have an excess of over 751 units. This is without the need to rezone any further property, and this is also an inventory that does not include rural agricultural land. This is a reflection of the county's prioritization that we should start building housing in our urban core and utilize infill and mixed-use development as a way to provide environmentally sustainable housing. Moving forward with the currently proposed goals, policies, and programs, the current element proposes 5 primary housing goals. I'll go over each one of those goals, their associated policy, and an example of a corresponding housing program. For brevity purposes, we won't go over all 30 of the housing programs, but we'll be available to answer questions about any of them. So beginning with Goal 1, enhance the diversity, quantity, and quality of the housing supply. And this will be implemented through Policy 1.1, which is that the county should provide a variety of housing adjacent to employment centers while supporting the unique characteristics of each community. And we take that down a step further and implement it with an example of Program 1.3. The county has 5 community plan updates in process right now, and we should look to these community plan updates as an opportunity to provide housing solutions that are acceptable within the community and therefore more likely to come to fruition. Moving on to Goal 2, provide housing for special needs groups. This is a very important part of housing element law. If you review Chapter 2, that provides the basis for the unique housing needs for the county, especially those special needs populations, be them elderly, large families, farm workers, and it's important for the county to have policies and programs that cater to these specific demographic groups. So we encourage housing that meets the requirements of special needs households, and a great example of this is the county's efforts to refine its reasonable accommodation procedure. This is something that's already been expanded within the housing element itself, and as a follow-on program, we will place that in the LUDC. And the intent here is to provide some administrative relief for those who need to primarily retrofit their existing home in order to accommodate their disability. So if you need a handicap ramp and it's going to go into your setback, if you need to add an elevator and it's going to exceed your building height, that the county can make some reasonable exemptions to its zoning code in order to facilitate that. And that's a direct requirement of state law. Moving on to goal 3, and that's provide fair access to housing and promote equal housing opportunities for all persons in all housing types. This, for us, is a service that's primarily provided by the county's Housing and Community Development Department. So Planning and Development worked in concert with that department to develop programs to support that cause. And one of those is to bolster support of fair housing public outreach and provide available public pamphlets, information handouts, and really just the offer for consultation with those who feel they're having a hard time gaining fair access to housing. Goal number 4, preserve the affordable housing stock and cultivate financial resources. Again, this is a service that, while the Planning and Development Department partly employs the county's inclusionary housing policy, we really rely on our county Housing and Community Development Department to leverage federal and state funding, such as home funds and CDBG funds, to provide housing units. This is an important component of how we actually use the county's inclusionary housing program, in that we collect in lieu fees and we use those to leverage a much greater source of funding through these federal and state programs. For instance, those programs allow us to use our in lieu fee funding as matching, that then the federal government comes in and matches those funds, and we increase our funding sources exponentially in terms of providing funding for affordable housing. One important program that is new to this element is that the county will consider the need for providing affordable housing when it contemplates selling county-owned land. So this is a program that we've continued from the last element that we think is really important in terms of if the county is going to clear out some of its inventory of property that it has accumulated, that these are the types of uses that we should consider in concert with that sale. Lastly, goal 5, foster cooperative relationships and efficient government. Again, this is important for us to work with 8 incorporated cities that we have in this area. Again, the county's Housing and Community Development Department works in concert with the state and federal government to provide affordable housing programs, and this is something that we need to expand in the future. So Policy 5.1 states that we should form relationships with public and private providers of housing and identify where feasible or eliminate government constraints. And you've already seen some result of this, for instance, our agricultural permit streamlining project, in which the county put a substantial amount of effort into facilitating, in part, the development of farm employee housing by streamlining the permit process associated with that. Upon adoption of the housing element, long-range planning staff will move forward with implementation. Of the 30 programs that we've proposed, there are 7 that will actually need a definitive one-time action. Our biggest priority amongst these is Program 1.2, which is the revision of the county's inclusionary housing policy. However, we have deadlines set out for each one of these actions. The remainder of the programs are those that are ongoing or at a stakeholder request. For instance, one program allows the public to ask the county to provide consultation on how state density bonus law can be incorporated into their project, and so that service will be made available at any time that it's requested. Specifically in relation to Program 1.2, this is the effort to revise the county's inclusionary housing policy and reinstitute it as an ordinance. This would allow greater flexibility for the board to modify the IHP when the market calls for it. It would also eliminate the need for a general plan amendment when the board wants to make these types of modifications, and allows us to also provide more sufficient detail on how to understand and implement the program. Long-range planning has already budgeted staff time to this project within the current fiscal year, and we have an approximate schedule assuming that the housing element proceeds to the board for adoption in early November. The targeted hearing date would be November 2nd. The development of the IHP ordinance and the revision of the policy would start directly after the adoption of the element. So that would start in November with the drafting of the ordinance itself, move into public outreach early next calendar year, followed by environmental review and adoption hearings in the summer of 2011. Before the draft element was distributed to the state for regulatory review, staff conducted targeted outreach with various stakeholder groups. These included members of the Home Builders Association, both for-profit and nonprofit housing providers, permit processing consultants, internal county staff, for instance, staff from the county's Housing and Community Development Department who must work cooperatively with us to implement these programs. And their input, where feasible, was incorporated into the element before it was submitted to the state. You can see an example of how this input was incorporated in that we did have a stakeholder specifically asked that the county provide more information on how state density bonus law can be incorporated into projects and implemented, and that is a program that is now reflected in the element. Upon completion of this targeted outreach process, the county moved forward with its submission of the draft housing element to the state. Ultimately, the state reviewed the county's housing element on 3 different occasions, beginning in August of last year. So here we can see the timeline of our first submission in August, the state's response in October, and moving forward until the final state HCD response, which was in June of this year. Ultimately, that response from the state acknowledged that the refined draft for the county's housing element was compliant with the statutes of state law, and that rather than resubmit again to the state for further review, that we should go ahead and move forward with our local review and adoption process. This is when staff transitioned into environmental review for the project. We conducted an initial study and found that no significant impacts would result from the project. Following this study, we released a draft negative declaration for a 30-day review. That's circulation happened in July and August of this year. Notification of this review was posted in 4 local newspapers, and over 1,400 mailed notices were provided. Staff also conducted an environmental hearing on July 29th, where 9 members of the public attended, a portion of whom spoke on the record. Their comments included, in basic form, questioning whether or not an ND is the appropriate document versus an full environmental impact report. As previously mentioned, staff has found that there are no significant environmental effects that would occur as a result of this project, so a negative declaration was the appropriate document. The public also showed concern that the housing element process is an unfunded state mandate. And that the county should not feel obligated to pursue continued housing element update and certification. Well, this is a process that costs the county a significant amount of staff time and money. It should be acknowledged that it does, certification makes us eligible for a numerous number of state and federal programs that without a certified element we would not be eligible for. Also, without a certified housing element, the county would become vulnerable to various lawsuits regarding our failure to show that we're meeting our housing need. Having a certified housing element obviously is first and foremost valuable for staff and the public as well, just to move forward with the production of housing with a policy framework in mind. Finally, there was concern that impacts of Program 1.2, which is the revision of the inclusionary housing program, and the formulation of a corresponding ordinance are not considered. There are programs in the housing element which will be accompanied by their own environmental review. This is an example of one, because staff does not know yet how and when the program will be successfully revised. It is speculative at this point in time to provide environmental review and assess what those impacts are. So in conclusion, just to reiterate, staff's recommendation is that the Planning Commission forward a recommendation onto the board, that the board adopt the required findings for the project, including CEQA findings, adopt the negative declaration, and adopt a resolution approving the 2009 to 14 housing element update. I conclude staff presentation. We're available to answer any questions.
Questions? Well, I'll start off with one. In our documentation, talk about in lieu fees being used to support, to build housing, and you indicated the project at St. Vincent's, where a lot of in lieu fees were used to provide that project, which is now in the city of Santa Barbara. And of course, the problem is that once county fees, I guess, are used to build projects in incorporated cities, the county doesn't get RENA credit for those projects. Did I read, or did you tell me that there's some law or some change proposed to that? What do you know about that?
Chair Brown, I'm not aware of any
Okay.
impending legislation that
Okay.
would solve that particular issue.
Okay.
There is some evolving legislation in terms of local jurisdictions' ability to take credit for housing that they have paid for the rehabilitation of. So again, that housing would have to be located within the unincorporated county. But it would increase our ability to count that, even though it's not new housing, that if we provide substantial rehabilitation and some assurance that that housing will stay affordable, that we can count that towards. One other thing to mention is that at the time that an annexation occurs, the county can negotiate with the city to receive RENA credit from any housing that would be expected to be developed in that area. Typically speaking, there are a number of projects where the county has received up to 50% of the housing that would occur in that annexation area. And there are, in fact, multiple examples of where we've taken credit for that in this current housing element cycle.
Is the rehabilitation of affordable housing, has that been a significant or even a minor part in the county's sort of repertoire of maintaining affordable housing?
Chair Brown, so there was a recent project in the county, Parkview Apartments, where we purchased an apartment complex, rehabilitated it, and here's the issue that legislation hopefully will fix, and that's that the county needs to, under the current state law, provide continued assistance to that project. So in this instance, the county purchased the project, rehabilitated it, turned over ownership to a nonprofit housing developer. But because the county does not continue to provide a subsidy for that project, we do not meet the state's requirement for continued assistance, and we're not able to count that as part of our inventory. Obviously, there are a number of local jurisdictions have voiced an objection to what they see as a shortfall in state law in that respect, and hopefully that will be rectified in the future.
Okay, Commissioner Brooks.
Yes, thank you, Chair Brown. I was interested in seeing under special needs, you didn't mention it in your overview, but it specifically said students is, the student population is considered special needs. And of course, I'm interested in that. 3rd District, we have IV. Could you just address that? How, is that the state definition, or is that our interpretation of special needs?
Chair Brown and Commissioner Brooks, I am not aware of a state definition for students being a special need that we need to provide housing for, but certainly from a county perspective, we recognize them as a unique demographic with some restricted income levels, and there was some thought put into the development of Isla Vista Master Plan to provide, some unit types that would be a good match for students.
Okay, so that inclusion was county-based versus state?
I believe
I
so.
agree with it, but, okay, that's where it came from. Thank you.
Okay, any other commissioner? No? Okay, if not, then I will open up the public hearing, and our first speaker will be Mr. Jerry Bunin.
Jerry Bunin, Government Affairs Director for the Home Builders Association.
Welcome.
Thank you very much, ma'am. And thank you for adjusting the schedule to make this time available. I have a question for the staff to answer. I didn't quite understand the distinction in the timeline between the inclusionary program and this density bonus law, because I tend to think they're intertwined. So if you could explain that, I would appreciate it. We definitely support removing the inclusionary program from the housing element. Can't emphasize that enough. We completely agree with that. You also need to think about the fact that existing approved projects cannot be built under the current program. They have requirements to build moderate units in the North County that they cannot sell. They're a couple of $100,000 under the market. Nobody would buy them. This program, as you know, has been controversial. We think it's also been unproductive and unworkable. 100 affordable homes in a decade that included one of the biggest building booms we've ever had would tell you that the current structure hasn't worked very well. And I'm also wondering if the 100 units includes the unbuilt units in the Rice Ranch. What we would suggest is going forward with an entirely fee-based program. And it should not simply put the entire burden on on new residential development. You're only adding in an average year over 20 years. The average for the last 20 years has been 400 homes. It's not very much to build a program off of. I believe you have somewhere in the vicinity of 70,000 homes in the unincorporated area. You certainly need to find a way to make them equally contributing to an affordable housing program, because for every new home we build, somewhere above 6 existing units are resold. So they have a much greater impact on the cost of housing than new construction does. Another reason to shift to, I'm not going to do this in 3 minutes.
That's fine.
Okay.
I'm.
Thank you.
Take what you need.
Another reason that you should think about shifting to a fee-based program, if we build 1 unit on site, that's 1 unit. If we give you $100,000 in fees, I don't know what the current leveraging capacity is, but it used to be somewhere between 8 and 13 times as much money that you can get. So you can wind up with a heck of a lot more affordable units. And people don't like to hear this, but it's always a mistake to mix up the need for affordable housing and the social engineering of putting those units spread out through a development. The most efficient use of your dollar, most bang for your buck, is to have apartment complexes built. That's the best way to go about doing this. The fees have to be reasonable. I'm assuming somebody's here from EPS, but when I was reading the report over the weekend, and I came across the line where it talked about the fees currently being incentivized to make us build units on site. I'm sure I yelled at my dogs and my wife, because it always annoys me. There's no incentive there. They're punitive. It's a big difference. If this program was an incentive to build affordable housing, it wouldn't be an issue. We also looked at the EPS business housing cost model. There are a lot of things in there that we do not think are accurate, and we'd be happy to work with them on that and make it more effective. I'm just going to toss a couple out at you. It uses the same square footage to build an affordable unit as to build a market rate unit, and it uses $70 per square foot. That's like,
What county?
yeah, I'm going to say what planet. But we think that the fees for the T-Fire rebuilds are in the $500 per square foot range. I might be wrong, but we think that's a more accurate reflection. Site improvement costs are really going to vary on product type, so you need a range there. And it's using 1.25 million as the cost for a home that's selling on the South Coast right now, and that's $900,000. So there's a lot of things about it that are just not accurate. So we'd be happy to work with them. And I know that he doesn't work for you, but, we have worked a lot with Stephen Falstich from the city of Santa Barbara on inclusionary, and I haven't run into too many government officials that I thought were as able to grasp the economics of building as well as Stephen has. So if you want to pay the city to borrow him and help you come up with a good program, we would clearly recommend that. So
I think we have staff.
I know, but
that get it.
Stephen is really good. So I would suggest you at least run the material by him, because no one has done a better job, in our opinion, of understanding the building conditions in the market. So fee-based, and keep the fees reasonable. I think it's $1.3 million to fee out in Santa Barbara for a 10-unit project. That's a lot of money.
Jerry, I just have a question for you. You mentioned alternative ways of doing funding rather than putting it on new development.
In addition to.
In addition to, right, okay, in addition to. What about on commercial or industrial? Does that work? I noticed in some of I think it was Sonoma County did some of that.
Well, certainly a linkage fee to job creation, a new commercial construction should be a component. My recollection, I've looked at so many inclusionary ordinances over my 8 years on this job, but I think you guys excluded it. And that was a mistake, and we told you that at the time. You need to have a linkage between job creation and the need for housing. Every 1.5 jobs you create the need for a house. The problem becomes when you're looking at raising fees based on the cost of housing, and you're having 180,000 homes in the county, and they're selling at 6-to-1, you have a turnover factor that you can somehow address some kind of a cost increase to make them a component contributor. Commercial sites don't turn over at that same rate. We've always suggested looking at the real estate transfer fee. We know that becomes a state issue, but certainly if it was somehow tied to a cost-benefit factor, if you bought a home for $100,000 25 years ago and you're going to sell it for $750,000 today, you should be contributing to an affordable housing program. It's a lot different than if I'm spending $500,000 building a home and selling it for $550,000 and I have to give you $20,000 for an affordable home. That doesn't really compute very well. So somehow looking for it. I know the realtors don't like it, but if this is a community-wide problem, we say this a lot. If it's a community-wide problem, you need to find a way to make the community part of the solution. It can't all depend on the new home builder and the new home buyer.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you
For the extra time.
Thank you.
Most
You're welcome.
appreciated.
Thank you. Miss Lori Tamura.
Good afternoon. Can I have more than 3 minutes?
Absolutely.
Thank you. First of all, I wanted to acknowledge the staff in regards to preparing this version of the housing element. I go back to, I think, '82, when the original housing elements were written, and I was on several blue ribbon committees over generations of housing elements. And this one is probably the most grounded in reality and really focuses on what the problems are. That may have been forced upon it because of changing in state law as well as the changing economy, but it is a user-friendly and easier to read document than in the past. I did provide some just clerical cleanup items to Nathan, so hopefully we can work on that in the coming weeks.
I'm glad to see, Lori, that you're reading these closely. We appreciate that. Thank you.
It was 12 hours of reading.
It's a lot of work, I know.
On Monday. It was a lot of, it's a lot of information. And, but it's a tool of the trade that I, as a professional, need to know and understand and be able to interpret for a number of people that are interested in doing development. So it's a commitment on my side to understand it and work with staff in making it a better document and usable. So I'm going to just have a couple of items that I'd like to have as discussion. First of all, cleanup items. Under policy point 1.1, which talks about having a diversity of housing, a lot of discussion is on mixed use and the community plans. And I feel like we somewhat have a sieve in our inventory because we're not including the number of units that are being created in Old Town Orchid as mixed use, second units, apartment units, whatever, and also what's happening in Old Town Los Alamos. If you're going to have 263 units on Bell Street, should that be included in the inventory? So the question comes back to what units are being counted. If it's just those units that are in the inclusionary housing program that are being included for the very low, moderate, and market units, I think we're leaving a lot on the table. So even if the units are not technically part of what the state is going to accept, I think that we should have a separate inventory of what is being permitted. The window that we have here for this housing element is a report that says from 2000 to 2008, what was permitted and what qualifies technically under all of these different diverse housing types to meet our diverse housing needs. And the report that we have here, I think, left some things on the table. And one of them would be, I could guess maybe 25, 30, 40 apartment units were built in the Old Town Orchid area or are permitted that aren't listed here. Another project which is not on here is Mariposa Townhomes, which was done by People's Self-Help Housing, and that's 80 units, and that's a farm worker housing project. But because it was done under a separate program, not a county program, it's not included in the list. But I think we should be proud of the projects that have been integrated into our communities and report those to the state and say we have not just what's here, not just what Housing Authority did, but we have other nonprofits that are successfully doing projects in our community, and you may not recognize them, but we want to tell you about them. Another one, which was actually a private developer, was Park Orchid, which is on the list, but it only counts for, I think, 10 units, but it's actually a 120 unit project, which is 20 units per acre rental, right next to Waller Park. And that was built in 2005. That is the classic infill development project, and yet we're only counting the 10 units. We're not counting the whole project, which again is something that the Orchid community has, I'm going to say, absorbed. It's part of the Orchid community plan, but we're only counting what was put into the low-income housing program. So I think there is opportunities here to flesh out our inventory and make sure that we're counting everything that's happening, because it is a success story. It is about, development that happens, whether it's nonprofit or it's a profit development. It should be recognized as meeting the diversity of housing in this area. We also have a project going on right now, which you have seen, which is the senior project that the school district is moving forward with. And that's not recognized in this at all, but it's moving forward through the permit process, at least something that's coming forward. So again, whether it's the accepted list by the state or it's a secondary list that says here's other projects, I think it should go to the housing HCD and report it to them as such. Table 4 in the EPS report shows where the developer fees went, but again, unfortunately, it only tells half of the story, because it doesn't tell us where the matching funds came from. If we're going to use this analogy of, developer fees are going to come in and it's going to be a 8-to-1 or 10-to-1 or 12-to-1 matching fund, we should see the other column of where did all those other dollars come from when St. Vincent's was built? Was that a $40 million project or a $30 million project and $2.5 million came from developer fees? I think that would be really helpful to flesh out this point of encouraging the developer fees to be part of this program and encouraged more often. So anyways, I'd hope that can be added. And one of the things that I've been a strong advocate of is the PIT program that has occurred over the last 5-6 years. And as the Planning Commission may know, it has been defunded. It's no longer part of the county official process. But you have about 4 policies in the housing element that refer to PIT.
Right.
And so I'm hoping that that means we're going to get refunded. Or is there some other mechanism that's going to become forward in this process? Because it was very beneficial. Some people didn't appreciate it, but I think overall those that participated in it saw quite a bit of merit. My last point is, in the housing element, there are a number of tables that list projects. I think there's 7 of them. And of course, I'm the political wonk and read these documents and actually compare the tables. And I think what would be really helpful with them is most of those projects are not projects that were built in the last 10 years. These are projects that have been around for a long time. And what those tables are telling you is we still have them in our inventory, but they weren't built in the last 10 years. So I think what would help is if those tables bolded or identified which ones are new to the inventory. Because all we're doing is basically a status quo housing. We're not creating new housing in this community, but we're protecting our inventory, which is good. But when you read those lists, sometimes you come across with the impression that 1,000 units were built in the last 10 years, and that's not the case. I think maybe in total, out of these lists, maybe 150 of those units have been built. So it is, I think, something that kind of needs to be cleaned up a little bit because it doesn't reflect clearly what I think people are walking away with when you look at those tables. And then in final, we are very much, have been involved with most of the projects in the North County that have had affordable housing units in them. They're very frustrating units, not only to design and embed into a project, but also to qualify, figure out how it's going to be marketed, go through the whole, all of the steps for those units. And then even later when you see those units come back on the market, how does that work? It's a lot of extra energy for something that really is a very low bang for the buck. So we're very much in support of amending the housing element, the inclusionary program, and the sooner the better, because we do have several projects that are sitting there not quite sure what to do based on this amazing economic time that we're in. Most of those projects were approved 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Remember what that was like. Most of the housing product right now is 1/3 to 1/2 the value it was back then. And so the whole, it's easy, we'll just give them those units, we can, we'll spread it across the rest of the units. That's not our reality anymore. And so it's something that has to be looked at in a totally different vein in this economy. And with the financing requirements that are out there right now for that buyer that's going to step in. I mean, people that have good credit and lots of money and a big down payment can't get a loan. How can somebody that's just at the edge trying to get into a unit, how are they going to get that loan? So I think at least for this next round of housing element, the inclusionary program probably needs to be retired, and it's an in lieu fee program. So those are my comments.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Laurie. While you're up there, for Mr. Eady, actually a question for you. You have any idea of the number of affordable units that have been embedded throughout the projects that were improved, let's say in the last 5 years or so? Talking 5, 10, 20, 100?
In the Orchid area?
In the North County?
In Orchid, there's probably been 25.
And what, okay, and in other projects that are.
And then
in
the biggest
process?
one, well, it's actually in the list, in this report. Lanes and the Bluffs at Mesa Oaks have 4 units each.
No, I'm talking about what you were talking about, of those that are like Rice Ranch, for instance. How many units?
Rice Ranch currently has about 30 units built and
Right.
occupied out of 725.
Okay.
Okay, woo-hoo. And we're pulling another 25 permits. We have not started construction on the affordable units. We could go to 100 units first before we start that first group. Our problem is that, we've literally been, and Mr. LaLoge is here in the audience, if you have any direct questions on Rice Ranch, he's here. We've really worked hard to get these products going, but the first house sold September of 2008. We're at September of 2010, and there's been 30 units. That's a very, very slow production. But we're hanging in there. We've met all the conditions. I mean, we've got a park, we've got a lot of roads, water, a brand-new water tank, signals have gone in, all the perimeter infrastructure's gone in on the Oaks and Pine neighborhood, and we're just trying to get the energy going that we can see production go.
Okay, great. Thank you. Commissioner Valencia.
Just a unrelated question, but still of interest. There's a major project coming on Quayside 3. Is that going to affect Rice Ranch considerably, or are they 2 different types of households?
Well, my guess is Quayside 3 is probably about 3 to 5 years out before sticks are going to be in the air.
So it won't be a problem?
We hope not.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Mr. Eady, would you like to respond to anything, any of comments? Ms. Tamura?
Chair Brown, just to back up, I can even respond to a comment made by our previous speaker,
Okay,
Mr. Bunin. He had asked that staff reconcile the relationship between the timing of the program to revise the county's IHP and another program, which is to alleviate those conflicts between state density bonus law and the county's current ordinances. The corrections that we need to make to the coastal land use plan to rectify the conflicts with state density bonus law are rather minor. So I think it's feasible for us to wrap those 2 programs together. Obviously, they're both programs that generate affordable housing. The state density bonus law, we have much less leeway in curtailing what is and isn't allowed because it's a state law that supersedes our local ordinances. In terms of the Ms. Tamura's comments for addressing some of the information in our tables, we're more than welcome to work with her between now and the board hearing to bring those up to speed. Specifically in terms of the PIT program, which she mentioned, that is mentioned in several of the county's programs. We have kept that in there for a reason, even though the board technically unfunded the private consultant who oversaw that program. Our intent is for planning and development staff to brief the board likely in the October to November timeframe with some ideas on how that process can be continued with or without the funding of that consultant. So we recognize that has been an important program that we'd like to continue that in the future one way or another.
Okay, good. Thank you. Commissioner
Is it
Valencia?
back to us to comment on?
Well, no, we're still in public comment.
Madam
okay,
Chair,
I'll say-
just
Hang on, Ms. Black.
further comment on process improvement, and maybe an adjustment that's necessary in these policies so that specific programs aren't tied into the policies. Our department undertakes process improvement constantly. I mean, it's just the way we do business. And so whether we have the process improvement team and the oversight committee or we do it in a different way, we will be continuing in our process improvement efforts.
Great. I have 2 more public speakers. I'd like to finish if that's okay. All right. Ms. Crosby, please.
Hi, thanks for the chance to, the timing worked out perfect for me. Thank you for that. And thanks for the extra time. I appreciate not having to rush through a page. I appreciate the mention early on in the staff report about the changing economy and the drastic changes that has been wrought on the housing stock everywhere, and even in Santa Barbara County. But I wanted to, as I begin, I wanted to talk about the action that you're going to take today. And I'm speaking for many residents in the Eastern Galita Valley who have, as many of you know, a neighborhood group called the Coalition for Sensible Planning. And we do feel that we have definite concerns regarding the actions that you intend to take today on the current 2009 to 2014 housing element. We understand that you intend to amend the county comprehensive plan through adoption of the proposed update to the current housing element. And we believe there are numerous important issues that make this action somewhat premature. Foremost is the fact that the previous housing element, 2003 to 2008, has not yet been certified by the state. Neither has it been approved by the Coastal Commission, whose approval is necessary for state certification. The reason that this seems to be relevant today is that the current housing element is totally based or very heavily affected by the previous uncertified, unapproved housing element. For example, the state mandated RHNA numbers from the last one that staff mentioned, the large number that the county was responsible for, seem to be still in question. The state and state HCD has said repeatedly that state mandated housing numbers are cumulative, so that if these numbers are not fulfilled, then they are carried over as requirements of the next housing element. That may or may not be something ultimately true, but it certainly is a big concern to us because the numbers are so huge, as you know. Also, as you know, the county sought to satisfy the state's RHNA numbers by placing the large majority of low-income housing in Isla Vista. This became part of the Isla Vista Master Plan and a key component to the earlier housing element. And many wide-ranging changes in both policy and land use were formulated in the previous housing element. As you know, it was quite a few changes, a large, well, anyway. They included, for example, the new zone district concept, whereby any area can be targeted for a zone district, and nearly anything can go into that zone district. So it can sort of be plopped down just about anywhere. There are restrictions, but the concept is there of zone districts. Zone districts can have high density, small or existent building setbacks, height variations, reduced parking, etc. Which would make it completely incompatible with local neighborhoods.
Ann, can I just interrupt you for a second? Are you talking about form-based?
I'm sorry?
Are you talking about form-based zoning in the Ivy Master?
I'm talking about the zone district concept.
Okay.
Quite possibly because of these large changes to land use policy and to the Isla Vista Master Plan, the Coastal Commission challenged the Isla Vista Master Plan, and this challenge is extensive, and many of these concerns have not yet been resolved. The county, as far as I know, is now negotiating with the Coastal Commission, but the outcome is pending, and the Coastal Commission has not yet approved the Isla Vista Master Plan. So these are some fairly big issues related to the previous housing element that definitely relate to this, that affect what's happening today. Another example of how the current housing element is closely related to the previous one is the inclusionary housing program. Policy 1.2, as staff mentioned, it recommends consolidate and continue. This program has been effective, yet needs to provide more flexibility as market conditions change. Pursuant to Action 2, in the earlier housing element, the county will continue to make improvements to the inclusionary program by first transferring it into an ordinance. A number of earlier speakers have mentioned a lot about the inclusionary housing program, the fact that the current structure is not working well, that there's a lot of effort for a small return, and I guess we have some concerns about this program. even though there's the idea that it will be reworked. Not long ago, a high-ranking county planner, Ron Cortez, who I know you all know, testified to the Board of Supervisors renouncing the value of the inclusionary housing program, that there were many problems, numerous breaking of regulations, and indeed inadequate regulations. And I know that you know this, that there were people did many things that was not expected that they would do, and as a result, a number of properties were lost to banks and other losing of the assets that there were. The county was not doing a good job of monitoring or enforcing the regulations, and this was something that Ron Cortez spent a lot of time talking about. And his conclusion was that the county should discontinue the inclusionary housing program. Now, this current housing element is recommending that this program be continued and transferred from the housing element into the Land Use and Development Code as an ordinance. This makes it much stronger, but why is there this recommendation when it was a failed program by the county's own analysis? Ron Cortez certainly was not mistaken about that. All this points to the fact that there needs to be painstaking analysis, which should occur before any action is taken today. So it's clear that the contents of the previous housing element are still under debate. And it's clear that the county has not dealt with the impacts of the previous housing element. There are many pending and important loose ends that have not been satisfied or completed. That's exactly what the Coastal Commission has said to the county. We believe that taking action to amend the county's comprehensive plan through adoption of the proposed update to the current housing element is premature and will only complicate an already very complex situation. Therefore, we recommend that there be no action to approve or adopt this current 2009 to 14 housing element until the previous one has achieved state certification. Thank you.
Any questions for the speaker? No? Mr. Eady, would you like to respond to any of her comments?
Chair Brown, let's start with the issue of the certification of the previous housing element. So staff took the board adopted its last iteration of the housing element, I believe, in 2007. And then we did a follow-on program for a focused rezone. We feel that that was everything necessary to satisfy the state's concern, and the state has fallen silent in terms of directing the county to do anything else to achieve certification for that element. The new cycle, obviously, and the need to move forward with this housing element has already begun. So we've pursued that. In our interactions, again, this current housing element's been reviewed by state HCD 3 times. There was no mention in any of their written correspondence the need to go back and further refine the 0308 element. There is a relation in that our first correspondence we received from state HCD regarding the 2009 to 14 housing element was that we had a 215 unit unaccommodated need, an inventory that carried over from the previous housing element. This is different than a shortfall, which requires a rezone. An unaccommodated need could be met by your excess surplus that you have in the current cycle. And so if you look at our, and I can scroll back to the slide, we actually, if you look, I believe it's 7 lines down, you can see the unaccommodated need. When we received that in the correspondence from State HCD, it was actually 215 units. We were able to reduce that by taking credit for some projects that were approved at the tail end of the 0308 cycle and could knock that 215 number down. But we were cognizant of that unaccommodated need and included it and met it with our current inventory, and there still is no need to do a rezone at this time.
Can one draw the conclusion from your comments then that based upon your work with the state for this element, that while you may not have received official certification, they would have carried over any, I'm going to use the word need, any requirements unmet in the previous element into the current element?
Chair Brand, I believe that would be correct. If there was a need for the county to take further action to provide compliance with state housing law, it would have been addressed in this current dialogue that we've had with the with state HCD, and we seem to have met all of their expectations. Moving forward, I think that there is some confusion regarding the Isla Vista Master Plan, the current efforts to get the LUDC adopted in the coastal zone, and the housing element process. The county has acknowledged in this element that the Isla Vista Master Plan has not yet been adopted by the Coastal Commission. Peter can speak more to that issue. He's been dealing with that more directly than myself. But the reality is that despite the Coastal Commission's delay on certifying the Isla Vista Master Plan, we have already been successful in producing housing in Isla Vista that is consistent with the spirit and the intent of the master plan. We've had to work around the bounds of Article 2, which is technically still in effect, but that has not prevented us from providing a significant amount of housing and housing that lives up to the intent of the master plan. So, really the message spoken to the state is that despite the lack of that certification, we are still providing housing consistent with the vision that we employed as part of the master plan. Certainly that could get easier with certification of the master plan, but it hasn't been a significant barrier up until now.
Is it the case that the Coastal Commission has in fact looked at the master plan and found deficiencies and just not and gotten back to the county? Or is it the case they just simply haven't gotten to it? Mr. Imhoff.
Madam Chair, we've submitted the approved IV master plan to the Coastal Commission. They've now accepted our submittal as complete after several rounds of completeness, which has delayed us up to this point. We anticipate that they'll be reviewing that over the next year. They have a total of 15 months in which to get that to hearing. And so between now and then, we anticipate that we'll be going forward for certification with the Commission.
Okay.
Next question, Madam
Yeah.
Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, Mr. Hemp, I was wondering, could they upgrade the requirements for the RENA needs based on population increases? No?
Madam Chair and Commissioner Valencia, if you're talking about, can the Coastal Commission upgrade
No, not the
those?
Coastal Commission, the state. Could our numbers be upgraded? And I'll tell you why I say that, because we have an error in the staff report and in the negative declaration in the population. We have it at about 402,000, and the population has been 435 to 434,000 people in the county. So that's a big difference. And so my question is, could these people come back and say, you misrepresented the population of the county, and now we're going to increase the numbers that you have to, bless you.
Chair Brown and Commissioner Valencia, no, that is not a possibility. The regional housing allocation is actually handed down by the state back in 2007. That's when we negotiate amongst ourselves and the incorporated cities on how that allocation is distributed amongst us. And so our local RENA was established at that time.
Had nothing to do with population at that time.
It is not refined according to population this late into the process.
Okay, that error is on page 11 of the negative declaration and in the staff report on page 7. Okay. The correct number is 434, 481. As of Sunday from the California.
Right, I think, but they may be different based on different days, different time periods. This is not a current, this is, I think
No,
what you said.
They
what are
haven't changed this population number in about a year.
And your date, Mr. Eady, is 2007, is when the state provided that?
I believe, Chair Brown, I believe the population numbers listed for the county are based on a projection provided by SBCAG in 2007.
Okay, thank you. Did you have any other concluding comments statements from?
Chair Brown, I think the last speaker also brought up an issue of the county contemplating providing a new zone district strategy as part of this housing element. Again, I think that might have been confusion with the land use development code. The land use development code won't introduce the idea of zone districts. That's in fact been in effect for quite some time. There will be some refinement in terms of the goal is to provide a consistent characterization of zone districts across the entire county.
Thank you. Commissioner Cooney.
Just back to Mr. Imhoff in dealing with the Coastal Commission. I think Ms. Crosby indicated there have been comments back to the county regarding the Isla Vista Master Plan in respect to the housing types and perhaps as to the solution to the 2003, 2008 housing element. And I just wondered if in your experience those comments are staff level or what have you received, if anything?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Cooney, to my knowledge, we have not received specific comments from the Coastal Commission, either the staff or the commission itself, with respect to the substance of the Ivy Master Plan. There were several rounds of completeness submittals of our local coastal program amendment submittal on the Ivy Master Plan that asked for clarification and additional information on a variety of different topics, including parking. But we have not received any substantive review per se. It was really just in regard to the completeness of our submittal.
And it now is complete.
That's correct. As of, I think, it was either June or July of this year, we received a letter from the commission acknowledging that our submittal was complete.
Thank you.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I had a comment
Please.
on one of the issues you were addressing earlier. In regard to the state HCD and their certification, that is essentially a certification. It is not an approval process. They don't approve or deny approval of our housing element. Our housing element is part of the general plan, which is guided by the government code. If they expressed objection to our housing element, a party, a community organization, or a neighborhood group, or anybody else could challenge the county in court on the adequacy of our housing element. But the state HCD has no role in that except to say we think it's good or bad. So certification is not necessary. At this point, as Mr. Eady's pointed out, we feel we've addressed all of HCD's concerns. We feel we've complied with the requirements in the government code for the housing element.
Okay, great. Commissioner Cooney.
No, I'm sorry, ma'am.
You know more? Commissioner Valencia.
Madam Chair, if you don't mind, I'd like to
Okay,
just
sure. Mr.
come back
Imhoff.
to Commissioner Cooney's question and clarify.
Okay.
The Coastal Commission completeness was conditional. It was conditional upon the county's acceptance of the LUDC changes and the LUDC being certified. If the LUDC is not certified, then we would have to recraft the Ivy Master Plan submittal in Article 2 framework.
Okay. All right, thank you. Okay, Mr. Williams, our next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. I am a Orcutt resident, and I am concerned about some of this stuff. And I would like to start out by saying that Orcutt is a semi-rural community. The Orcutt Community Plan is a certified document in 1997. How can you keep this community rural if you destroy the rural areas? Once you break ground, you are no longer semi-rural. Example, Key Site 3 was the gateway to Orcutt. This was part of the Orcutt Community Plan. How will this not create significant impacts? Also, it is proposed to adopt the Bay Area air quality rule as a model. How can this model be adopted when it has not been approved or accepted by the Bay Area officials? The Bay Area rules are not project specific. Every county is different in air quality. This is short-sighted long-range planning. Also, wording is important and needs to be exactly specific to the subject and project. No gray areas, no words that can be changed. For example, could be, should be, maybe, those type of words should not be used in a plan. The only words that should be used for something that has to be done should be shall. There should be no gray areas in any of this stuff. Another thing, once again, Santa Barbara County residents are being bullied with the unfunded state mandate by the financially broke state of California, strong-arming the financially broke Santa Barbara County to create unwanted housing that residents have strongly rejected in the past years and does not want now. This county has to stand up to take broken state officials has to stand up to our broken state's officials. Ron Cortez said about a year and a half ago to the Board of Supervisors, this state mandate has proven to be a roadmap to nowhere. Other than pure corruption, there is entirely too much pressure put upon your planners to satisfy this unfunded mandate, which many times plans are completed while breaking or bending rules with false or misleading information. This is considered government corruption once these are approved. This county planning department certainly has the appearance of some of these statements. The Orchid Community Plan has tons of amendments. Please stand up and tell our state of California we are not interested in their mandated housing. We do have a plan, and the state plan does not fit extremely well into our organized Orchid Community Plan. Also, as a last thought here, passing a negative declaration on this would be like saying minimum wage is going to be good for everybody. There will be no significant impacts. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Williams' statements just brought to mind, and perhaps this is something Ms. Black can help me with. I believe I remember that hearing when Mr. Cortez got up before the board to talk about the county's affordable housing program and how it was not being well managed. And I think at that hearing, if I recall, the board took action to get it better managed, if I can use that language. You know, they took steps to hire somebody to bring it up to compliance and to go into it and look at it carefully. And perhaps you can help refresh my memory on that. Maybe not. I don't know, maybe there's another planner then. But I think that we've read in this document the changes that have taken place. And I know I spoke with Mr. Mattson recently, and he confirmed that it's a much better managed program, and there's not the many problems that existed at the time that Mr. Cortez got up before the board.
Madam Chair, I don't remember the precise hearing that's being referenced, but there have been a number of hearings over the last, 5 years with respect to affordable housing and affordable housing programs in the county, management of those programs, and whether they're appropriate or not. One avenue of discussion was a committee that I think Commissioner Blau served on to look at the housing programs and make recommendations about which should be retained and which should be changed, and he does bring that up quite often. Other hearings focused on the management of the county's own affordable housing units and whether those units are indeed maintained in an appropriate status. Still other hearings have focused on whether or not we should, as a county, respond to the state in a different way besides accepting their mandates and planning for their mandates. So I think there have been a lot of discussions. I'm not sure exactly which one the speaker was referring to, but we've certainly focused on affordable housing within the county quite extensively in the last
Indeed.
half a dozen years or so.
Well, as I recall back, it used to be, there was a person in the finance department or some other department that took care of it, and then the county hired a director with an additional person to take care of it, so it did increase in emphasis with the county, the emphasis was increased.
That's correct.
Right. Okay. And my question to Mr. Eady, based upon Mr. Williams' comments, and maybe I'm taking his comments out of context, but the way I understood what he said is that what we're considering today doesn't really change anything in the Orchid Community Plan. It doesn't. Is that?
Chair Brown, that is correct. I think there's a significant thought was put into the interrelation of community planning in this housing element. A lot of the proposed policies and programs recognize the need to use the community plans as a tool to provide housing that's both meets the requirements of the state but also preserves the character of our unique communities. And first and foremost, There are no required rezones of any property, and the Orchid Community Plan is part of this.
Or any
Correct.
community plan. Thank you. Okay. Commissioner Valencia.
Yes, I think Mr. Williams made comment concerning the Bay Area air quality standards being applied to Quayside 3. And so could you comment on that?
Chair Brown and Commissioner Valencia, I can let Mr. Imhoff answer that in more detail, as he's been the supervising planner on another long-range planning project, which is the Climate Action Strategy.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Valencia, this of course goes well beyond the scope of this housing element and is a broader set of issues. We're going to be coming back to your commission, hopefully in the next month or two, with a full briefing on climate action strategy, where that stands, and on the specific question of complying with recent changes to the CEQA guidelines that require us to both evaluate greenhouse gas emissions and make determinations of significance.
Okay, thank you. Then our last speaker will be Mr. Martin, and thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the commission. My name is John Martin, Martin Farrell Homes. I'm a home developer, builder. I've been active in this community for some time and have had more discussions about inclusionary housing than I care to remember, but I want to focus my comments today just on inclusionary housing with my 3 minutes. I really want to leave you with the message, I think, with inclusionary housing program having been one of the centerpieces, if not the centerpiece, of the county's affordable housing program for, I'm going to say, about the last 30 years, certainly the last 20. The king has no clothes. I mean, I think we have to, at some point, admit this, that this program has taken so much staff time, so much controversy over the years, so much effort on the level of builders like me to try to deal with the mechanics of making it work just so that we can take care of our business. And yet, if you look at the EPS study, which frankly was a great study, I mean, it was a lot of helpful information in there, so thankful that the county commissioned that. But if you break down the EPS stats, in the North County, on an annual basis, on average on an annual basis, and excluding the Rice Ranch development, because those units haven't been built yet, and my guess is they probably won't be able to be built for reasons I'm going to share with you in a minute. There were 9 units on average built per year under the inclusionary program in the North County. In the South County, it was 4. So, I mean, the number of units we're getting out of this program is absolutely ridiculous compared to the level of effort going into this. I think if somebody added up the amount of staff time in the county effort alone just in administering this program, you would come up with hundreds of thousands of dollars per unit produced if somehow all that data could be gleaned as to how much time is going into this program. Now, I do want to say that fees are the way the county is helped under affordable housing. And so I don't want to sound like a developer standing up here saying we shouldn't be required to do anything. What I think we should be required to do is pay some fees. I think the fees should be more broadly based than they're paid right now. For example, a $10 million home in Montecito pays no fees, but a 10-unit tract of $300,000 homes in Lompoc pays quite a large fee. And I will be willing to bet you that the $10 million home in Montecito creates more demand for low-income services than the $300,000 homes in Lompoc. It's a controversial subject. I realize that. The Realtors Group is always against it. The Home Builders Group is always for it. And yet, it needs to be a more broadly based fee if the county HCD can get enough money to really do something here. And I think they've made great strides, because in the last 10 years, county HCD, finally said it may make sense for developers to pay the fee instead of build the units. And that has turned into some real money, and money that the county can use to leverage other money. And then nonprofits can build that housing, and the county can frankly start washing its hands of actually monitoring and managing specific affordable housing units. It's the only way that the future of this is ever going to make any sense. So having said that the king has no clothes, I'm trying to tell you, you should really just, for once and all, do away with inclusionary housing program as we know it today. Now, on the mechanics side of it, that's the philosophical side. On the mechanics side of it, I just want to say one thing. There, and I guess my chart is not going up, but I will just essentially tell you what the chart said. And I'm sorry, am I going over time, Madam Chair?
Please take the time we need.
Okay. Right now in the north, I'm going to focus on North County because most of my development is in the North County, so I'm more familiar with that. The moderate income maximum sale price of a home in the North County today is about $317,000. The median price of a condo in North County is $140,000. And there are plenty of transactions supporting that, there are 125 or so sales this year of condos where half of them are below and half of them are above that 140,000. The low income maximum sale price is $208,000. The very low income maximum price is $136,000. So the market is nearly meeting even the very low income ownership maximum price level under the program. So there's absolutely no reason for anybody to be building moderate income maximum sales prices of $317,000 or low income at $208,000 when the market is readily providing this stuff every day of the week. It's impossible for me to sell an affordable home with governmental price restrictions on it at above market prices. Nobody will buy that. Unfortunately, the way the housing element has been worded and is worded in the present configuration is that by housing market area, there are certain percentage requirements by income category. In the North County, I believe it's 5% very low, 5% low, 10% moderate. The mechanical problem I want to just leave you with here now is that is absolutely got to change, and those percentages have to go in the ordinance that staff has been talking about, which the home builders support. Because if you put the percentages in the housing element, there's no way to deal with this problem of when the market's meeting the need, you don't need to be requiring those units to be built on site anymore. There's no practical purpose to do it. On top of it, the fee, in lieu fee for very low and low income is intended to travel with the median price of condos. And I don't know if you've seen this, but the county HCD folks have published a proposed draft in lieu fee for 2010, in which the in lieu fee is substantially lower for very low and low because the market has gone down so much. That makes perfect sense. The problem is at the moderate income level, that fee doesn't travel with the market. And so the fee proposed for North County, for Santa Maria, to offset a moderate income unit is $140,000. So because that fee is still very high, a fellow like me is really between a rock and a hard place, because if I build the unit on site, nobody's going to buy it unless I discount the price of it well below market. And if I pay the fee, my fee is exorbitant compared to the cost of doing anything. So you're really hamstrung at that point. So I think there's a way to deal with this and to work out if you decide you're going to keep inclusionary, which I recommend you don't, there is a way to work out the mechanics of it in an ordinance form so that when the market changes, we can adjust it from year to year. We can have formulas and leave the broad policy of the housing element just that, a very broad policy. But if you have percentage requirements in the housing element as proposed now, that really defeats that purpose, because you can never get away from those requirements without a general plan amendment, which we all know isn't going to happen. So those are my thoughts for you. Thank you for taking the time to listen.
Thank you for the good comments. Any questions for Mr. Martin? Commissioner Brooks?
Yes, I just want to comment, I passed those affordable units in Lane's End and then further up the hill in the Bluffs. If I was sitting here 5 years ago, I always thought that was a great idea. And now when with the reality of our economic climate, and I think of places like St. Vincent's, where the housing is set up, and then using the in lieu fees and where the services are. I always often wondered, way up in the rural area, this is great, and you want to have integration of your schools, and you want to have everybody, being part of the community. But in some ways, when I look at the different housing, in the Lompoc Valley, perhaps, when this inclusionary housing policy is re-examined, it will be re-examined in our new economic world. And I think, some of these, I'm not where I was 5 years ago in terms of, supporting, the on-site housing.
Commissioner Brooks might tell us about the experience with a $58,000 condo that she came across about 6 months ago.
Well, when you gave when the last speaker gave the prices that are going, condos going for 140, condos in Lompoc Valley are going for a condo that was almost $300,000 when I was looking last year, when my son came back into the community. They couldn't get $79,000 for it. And there were several condo communities. I have a dog at my house that I know was abandoned when somebody left one of these large communities where we had so many people just walking away because the condos were down. Not 40%, not 50%, probably 80%.
Okay, you're done. Okay, Mr. Eady, did you have any comments on Mr. Martin's public comment?
Chair Brown, I don't have any substantive comments. Obviously, staff, as it's expressed in its program, is amenable to moving forward and taking a look at this program and fixing some of these deficiencies. One thing that I think is of note in terms of some immediate relief for this issue is that county HCD will be, as I understand it, exercising their right to reevaluate these fees. The program allows them to adjust them based on market fluctuations, I believe at a minimum on an annual basis. And so that the fees, as a result, will be reduced. I don't think that that's going to be a panacea in terms of fixing this issue, because the fees applied to your project are those that are in effect when your application is complete. So if the board feels it's appropriate for that fee relief to apply retroactively to projects, that's something that they'll have to direct staff to make that accommodation.
Okay. Commissioner Cooney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I find all of these speakers very helpful in understanding the benefits and detriments to the housing plan, not only the one that we completed last year, but as we craft the new one. I think it is a centerpiece of the new plan to improve the affordable housing program, our inclusionary housing program. So to the extent that it's not working at the present time, it may be worthwhile to look at the numbers to draw it back into reality. But it still strikes me that our housing policy needs to take into account this ingredient of an overall affordable housing program. And it's not just for the current market times that we're adopting this 5-year plan. It really is a broad look at it. So as discouraging as it might be now, I think it's too soon to throw that baby out with the bathwater. We can work on it and make it better, and that work shouldn't stop simply because it's a part of the overall housing plan.
Commissioner Valencia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There was a comment made by Mr. Bunnan concerning that the best way for low cost is to build apartments. And I think I agree with him 100% with that. But secondly, I have to remember that there are some large families that apartments living is not conducive when you have 3 or 4 kids. So there should be, besides the apartment building in this process, there should be some rental building of housing that say in groups of 30 or 40s, not to have a major tract of 200 homes of low-cost housing, because then it would become a ghetto. But there should be still some housing for these people that would not fit in apartments. But I do think that the inclusionary housing, I saw one in Mr. Martin's projects where he built a couple up in Lanes, well, I won't mention the final word, but all of the units are very nice, and I drove by in that parking lot. That parking in that house is full of oil because the people who live there have a vehicle that leaks oil, and everybody's got clean parking pads of concrete except that unit. And so in other units I've seen the similar where the lawns are not being taken care of and so on. So there is a major problem. It's unfortunate that we have to mention things like that, but it's a reality.
Ms. Tamura.
Thank you very much. I apologize. I did have one other point I wanted to mention. What I have with me here today is the housing element guidelines from '93 2002, and then the 2005 housing elements. And it's interesting to go through these and see the cycle that we have been through. So I'm going to read one paragraph out of the housing element guidelines of 93, because literally, if you think about where we are in the market, we're 1993, 17 years ago. We took a ride, and we're back down to the bottom. And so what this paragraph says in regards to the housing market areas, and this is on page 15 of the 93 housing element, because market conditions and housing needs differ in varying housing market areas, the revised inclusionary program requirements are housing area specific. Cuyama Housing is meeting its affordable housing needs in all income categories, so an inclusionary requirement is not proposed in this area. In both the Santa Maria and Lompoc market rate units are being sold competitively with the upper moderate and low moderate income ranges. Lompoc housing market is also currently meeting low-income needs, and therefore the inclusionary requirements for these target market areas are deemed where the market is meeting that need. So they will not be required to do the inclusionary requirement. Both the South Coast and the San Ynez housing market area have unmet needs in all the categories. So when this housing element was adopted in 93 for that cycle, there was an acknowledgement that we're just going to put it on hold in certain market areas for that period of time. So I think we can kind of learn from the past and realize that we're not going to throw it away, but because of the market conditions, we need to look at other tools. So,
Thank you. I had just written this down. I said, I think there are two markets. There's one in North County and there's one that's South County, and it's certainly the South County where you do need this program, because the North County, current time, I don't think you do. But hopefully that Mr. Edie and Mr. Imhoff will be bringing forward an ordinance that may reflect that. Well, we'll see. I think I know there'll be lots of opportunity for the community to provide input, and hopefully Mr. Bunin will be doing that as well, since you've a lot of experience and lots of ideas and have probably seen a lot of inclusionary ordinances over the years. But I'm wondering, any other commissioners, any other thoughts? None? Commissioner Brooks? No? Yep, I think we're...
Okay.
Yep.
Well, I'll get started.
Okay, good.
I have to say, when we went through the last housing element, I was out there, and I know that when I started reading just the basic premises for this housing element, I was delighted. I mean, what struck me, we have the preservation, so this is coming down from the state and what this county, preservation of rural land, economic stability, co-location of jobs and housing. I remember for the last one, there were some possible rezones up in the Vandenberg Village, Mission Hills area, out in the middle, I could say relatively speaking, out in the middle of nowhere. We couldn't understand. Why would you put apartments out there where there are really no services? Everybody would have to get into cars. And it seems that, basing our new housing element, or this new cycle, on what I consider, very sound building principles. And I was just delighted to read it. I think having the housing, in the urban areas where there are services, I think that's really important. I taught for 30 some odd years in a city school. It's very, to have the services there for the families, to have good public transportation. I know that as I read this in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, okay, SB-CAG, has a lot to say as far as, developing transportation systems and regional transportation systems to support, hopefully, this element. Farm worker housing. Okay, I had some, questions about that. I know since I've been on the commission, we've approved the streamlining, for the farm worker housing on ag lands. Yet in the study, as I was reading, the surveys say that farm worker families, don't want to live out on the on the ag land. They would prefer to be in a somewhat urban setting, again, where there's schools, activities for their children. And I'm wondering if, when we talk about where the fees are going to go, if we seem to be thinking, okay, we'll get the farm worker housing as far as having kind of dormitory type, but we're not thinking of the farm worker families. And maybe others might have some responses to that, but it seems to me there needs to be, if fees are to be paid, if agricultural businesses were to, have to give some monies for this type of housing in more urban areas versus the idea of let's just satisfy it, with on-site ag housing. And I don't know if anybody had any thoughts on how the housing element creates that.
Chair Brown and Commissioner Brooks, in various places in this current housing element, we mentioned the Creekside project, and I think that is a great example of exactly what you're talking about and can hopefully serve as a template for not only the use and part of the County Housing Trust Fund that's been developed with in lieu fees, how that can work with a public-private partnership to develop a program that is, or a project that's specifically intended to provide farm worker housing. Certainly there could be repetition of projects like that in other areas like Orchid. But ultimately that's a great example of a project that is, at least what the county determines is an urban area. Although maybe not what other jurisdictions would view as extremely urban. And it has specific designs that, large units, unusually large units for apartments to cater to that demographic. And so I think that is certainly the type of project that can be touted as the success of the use of our Housing Trust Fund, and probably something that we should look to do more of in the future.
Was that, Creekside, was that paid for fees that came from out of that market area? When these, it was just that.
Chair Brown and Commissioner Brooks, I believe so, because the requirement is that we spend in lieu fees in the same HMA, although we haven't always stuck to that, so.
Okay, but that was something that was suggested probably in the study that
that is something that is suggested to reevaluate. I think what's important to understand is that Los Alamos is actually in the Santa Ynez housing market area, the way it's mapped. I think that's a concept that seems alien to most people because it's fairly far removed, but that is in fact the way the housing market areas are defined at this point in time.
Okay. Commissioner Valencia.
On this housing for low income and low cost, and I don't see anything wrong with that. I think it's great. But when you start putting the migrant labor help in there, many of these people come across to work, and as a result, they have to find a place to live. In the old days, they had these camps right outside the city limits where these people lived, and they had cafeterias, and they would be picked up in a truck and taken to the jobs. Now they all have to be in housing someplace in the city. 6 or 7 in a house. I've been in houses where there basically have been mattresses, living room, all the bedrooms, just mattresses, and people just sleeping on it. They're just flop houses. And I don't think we want to build anything like that. I don't think we need that. And I wonder, why isn't there any pressure on the ag community to build these things for just the people who come over seasonally, stay there, work there, eat there, and are picked up in a truck and taken to the fields from there, instead of having 40, 50 cars parked along the side of the highway, possibly creating a problem, many of them without insurance, trying to get to the job and back and forth. Are the people in the ag being included into this to try to participate in some way?
Mr. Eady.
Chair Brown and Commissioner Valencia, we certainly include the ag community in our discussion, and they were obviously a preeminent part of our ag permit streamlining. Those were permit efforts that primarily made it easier for the development of on-site agricultural dwellings. However, as previously mentioned by a fellow commissioner, there's a reluctance by actual agricultural workers to live in such rural areas outside of cities where they have access to entertainment and services and shopping.
Well, families perhaps, but not the ones that come individually for, green card, come in and stay 7 months and then go back. There's several million of those that come throughout the country. And in the past, those were what was called the Bracero program. And I know because I drove a delivery truck that delivered products to them. And it was just like an army, right outside the, it was on 5th Street in Oxnard, right within walking distance to the city. I mean, these things existed. They existed in Santa Paula. They existed in Fillmore. Oxnard, all over the area. I just don't understand why the farming community doesn't get behind some of these projects to help. Because you try to build this low-cost housing, and then you try to put these units into a nice tract of homes, and these folks don't maintain those properties, and they're in and out. Somebody's responsible for the rent, and half the time they don't make the payments. And I'm not saying all of them, but they do have these problems, and that's why, as Mr. Martin says, these programs don't work. They create more problems than they solve.
I think today has been a very interesting day to get the public's comments, and I appreciate you all coming, and I appreciate, first of all, your reading the documents that have been provided. I thought myself that this housing element was very good, very well done, and I wanted to thank staff for working on it to get the kind of clarity and information out there that's useful and helpful. I think it was less so in the last element. I think this has been certainly a much better element. In fact, I kind of enjoyed reading it. I read a lot of documents, but I found it very easy reading, and I thought the information was good. And I do look forward to the changes that will be coming as a result of the inclusionary program going into an ordinance. I think that will be very helpful for all concerned, for those who will be living in the housing that will be built, for developers. I would like to just make a comment that my appreciation, because my thing is always one of design, and I noticed that in one of the appendices, that is a carryover from the last housing element, is a listing of sort of compatibility elements. And I think that's really good. Not that the county doesn't do a good job of that and ensuring that in all housing projects, but I think it's always worthwhile. It makes me feel good anyway to see that in there. I don't know that I have any other specific comments. Oh, the other comment I had was I'm glad to see the emphasis on community plans and how the housing is the way housing is looked at is sort of a bottom-up process rather than top-down, because I think that's what happened in the last housing element. The pronouncement was, we are going to do thus, rather than the way we are doing it this round, where we're seeing in the community plans, the community is discussing and looking at the various sites and how best it can fit into their community. So I think that's a very helpful concept, and I do appreciate that that's been included. Other than that, I think that we will see Mr. Eady come perhaps next spring. We will see an ordinance come back. And hopefully in the interim, there will be lots of outreach and community input on that ordinance for the inclusionary program. And any other last thoughts? Commissioner Cooney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wonder, as a matter of process, first of all, looking back on our experience with the last go-around on the housing element, most of the discussion, most of the intense discussion and community concern revolved around rezoning, and first and foremost about the current plan is that we aren't proposing new rezoning, which is a combination of a number of factors, including the economic climate. But still, as our speakers have pointed out today, and as you yourself noted, we have a different housing issue in the North County than we do in the South. And it concerns me a little bit that we were given the draft housing element early on by staff, and we've had the opportunity to dig through it and answer our own questions along the way. But I just have a nagging concern that the South Coast community may not be as up to date as Ms. Crosby is, and there may be concerns that haven't been voiced. I know we had a number of hearings on the housing element the last time, and we're proposing in basically a 2-hour time frame here in Santa Maria to recommend adoption by the board. So I'd like to ask staff if they feel there would be merit in having a separate hearing in the South County, not to repeat what we're doing here, but basically to make sure that all elements of the county have had a chance to understand and, if not agree with, at least make comment on the proposed 2009-14 element.
Before staff answers, I wonder if you could provide just information of any meetings or outreach efforts that you've done for the South County.
Chair Brown and Commissioner Cooney. As previously stated early in this process, we did focus stakeholder outreach. In terms of general public outreach, in context of the environmental document, like I said, we published notification of that hearing in 4 newspapers, and those are newspapers that are spread out within the county. So we choose one that's on the South Coast, one that's in Santa Ynez, one that's in Lompoc, and one that's in Santa Maria. So everyone has an opportunity to take notice. We also have a 1,400 party strong notification list for parties who want to be notified of anything housing that's going on throughout the county. Those members of that list received notification not only of the environmental hearing, but today's hearing. Today's hearing is another example of where we also posted for newspaper ads. So there's significant effort in the context of both this hearing and the environmental hearing to solicit public participation and response. And in terms of South Coast participation, we always make our South County room available for those who want to participate remotely rather than travel all the way to the North County. We obviously have some constituents here who felt it was important enough to actually make their appearance in person. But ultimately, I personally have fielded several dozen phone calls from those members that are on that mailing list. And the basic tenor of the conversation is, will this housing element rezone anything in my community? And our obvious answer to that is that no, your community plan update process is where you should look for opportunities to provide more housing. And there's waning interest beyond that from those members of the public. So we solicit their support. We would encourage them, if they have missed the opportunity to participate today, to participate at the board hearing, and ultimately I defer to the commission if they feel it's appropriate to have a second hearing. Of note, we will be giving a briefing on this item at the Montecito Planning Commission, I believe on October 27th.
Other than the group with which Ms. Crosby is affiliated, are there, I don't believe there are any other groups on the South Coast in, say, in the Goleta Valley, in the unincorporated area, in Nolita, or many other interested individuals other than those in her group. Is that safe to say? Hang on just a minute, Jerry.
Chair Brown, I think it's important to note that we have a very rigorous community planning program going on throughout the South Coast, from Gaviota to Goleta, some activity going on in Montecito and Summerlin. The housing element tends to at least come up anecdotally and in context in a lot of those meetings. I've always made myself available to give presentations on the housing element in the context of those if necessary. I can also add that from my own involvement recently with the redevelopment agency, that it comes up from time to time in our discussions revolving around the Isla Vista housing element. So,
in fact, did you provide presentations to both the Gaviota Project Area Committee and the Goleta Project Area Committee?
we do not provide coordinated presentations to those committees. If they request it, we're more than happy to provide it. Ultimately, I think the interaction has more been the community planners who are in charge of those. If they've fielded questions regarding the housing element, they forward them to me, and I make sure that they're answered.
Okay. Mr. Bunin, if you'd like to make a comment, we should come to the podium, please. While he's working his way up here, let me just mention that I did call a few developers who have, over the course of the years, been involved in this, in county housing element. Craig Zimmerman with the Tobes Group. I left a message for Joe Campanella. He called me back, but I didn't get anything. And also with Jeff Nelson, who did, in fact, write a letter. So there were a few. I didn't get all of them, but I got a few. Anyway.
They greatly appreciated it. I talked to Craig yesterday
Good.
and John Campanella today.
Okay, good, great.
So,
Thank you.
and I conveyed a lot of their information in it. Just a very quick comment regarding Commissioner Cooney's concern. When we met with staff, our biggest concern was moving along quickly, because no one's going to be able to proceed with any developments until we get this inclusionary resolved. It's a real huge roadblock for approved projects and future projects. And if we go to another hearing for the commission, I'm assuming that's probably going to be November, then we're going to be in the middle of next year if we get to the supervisors, and then we're all the way into 2013 before we have something we can start working with. So we appreciate the fact that it's important to get a lot of public opinion, but we really wanted staff to come up with some relief now because we can't proceed. So if it gets delayed again, it's just really going to aggravate a really bad situation where we're talking about new construction providing affordable housing when new construction can't build market rate housing. So we're trying to move it along at a reasonable rate and be as reasonable as possible. And I just wanted to make sure that was part of the thinking process here. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Eady, when this goes before the board, you'll have a similar notification process to, are you going to re-notify those people on your list, or maybe you can explain to us? Because that would be another opportunity as well.
Chair Brown, certainly, when we sent out the initial 1,400 mailing notices and posted in the multiple newspapers for the environmental hearing, and then we had, a relatively low turnout, we didn't, at that point in time decide to retract our noticing efforts.
Right.
We sent out the exact same number of notices for this hearing as well, to continue to, reach out and provide at least the opportunity for them to participate.
And you'll do that for the board?
Correct.
Board hearing? Okay. Okay. Commissioner Brooks.
Yes, thank you. I did look through some of the public comment letters, and I did notice there was one from South Coast, and it was from the Open Project, and they seem to agree with, many of the basic components of the housing element. They did bring up TDRs. Now, I consider that, North County, South County, I know that's more of a South County issue than a North County issue. And there was a request for some consideration of that. That made me think, just in terms, were the people in the South County, reading this and looking carefully at it?
I think that's just Ms. McGinnis, who participated in the Naples project.
Right.
Where that was a huge issue.
It
But
was, right.
I think for most folks, in
But
the
she-
unincorporated South Coast, I don't
Right.
think it's an issue.
Well, my point is that she did write the letter, and I mean,
I understand that.
that was showing me that, South Coast people were looking very closely at this.
Well, I think that's
some of the
Christina
groups.
McGinnis looking
Yeah,
closely, and I think
right. Well, there was-
the city of Goleta has also considered it, as has the city of Santa
Right.
Barbara.
And
So-
there was another letter from Pueblo, regarding, some issues with Isla Vista. But again, that shows me that they were in tune, with what was in the housing
Right.
element, and their input has been given and
I think-
considered.
I think people who are interested in this art do follow it.
Yeah.
I have that feeling. Anyway, Commissioner Cooney.
Madam Chair, maybe I could, it may already be set that you're having the Board of Supervisors hearing to adopt the plan in Santa Barbara, but if not, I think consideration should be given to that factor that this hearing may have been difficult for people to connect with. I mean, some have made the effort, absolutely, to their credit, but this is an important element. If you look at all the elements of our general plan, I don't think any is more important than the housing element, and I just want to be sure everybody who has concerns gets those answered one way or another. So that would be my thought, that we could schedule a board hearing in the South County.
To speak to that issue, Chair Brown and Commissioner Cooney, staff did think about that and the fact that this hearing was being held in Santa Maria. According to our very regimented docketing deadlines, we could theoretically make the last hearing in October for the board, but that would have been another Santa Maria hearing. And it was our decision to push that back by a week to November 2nd, which at this point in time is really only a projected date. Obviously, we rely on the commission to make the recommendation today if we want to stick to that schedule. But November 2nd is, in fact, a Santa Barbara board hearing.
Okay. Ms. Black, something beyond that? Okay. With that, Commissioner Cooney, do you feel that's satisfactory?
I wouldn't use the word satisfactory, Madam Chair, but I do think the record has been augmented by these comments from Mr. Bunin and yourself and others who have certainly made it clear that there's been an effort to bring people into the process, and it doesn't always yield results. I think it does when it gets close to home, and the changes suggested by this plan, not only is it clear, but it isn't really impactive to as many people as the prior plan was.
Absolutely.
So I'm comfortable that we've had a thorough hearing. I think if we have the board hearing down there, it will give everybody an opportunity to address the issues, and maybe the board will have to consider it more than once. But I guess I'm convinced we shouldn't schedule another hearing of this commission.
Okay. Thank you. Unless there are any final thoughts, I'd like to go ahead and make the motion that the commission adopt the required findings for the project specified in attachment A of the staff report, including the CEQA findings, that we adopt the final negative declaration included as attachment B, and adopt a resolution included as attachment C approving the, this is our recommendation to the board, that they approve the 2009-2014 housing element, including any corrections noted therein. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, great. Ms. Rodriguez, would you do the roll call, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Brooks?
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Valencia?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Motion carries 4-0.
Good, thank you. Thank you very much, staff. And the commission has one last item. We're going to cancel our meetings of the September 15th and October 6th. Could I have a motion for that, please?
So moved.
Okay,
I'll
and a
second.
second. Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Great, okay. Thank you very much, and appreciate a good day, everybody, and appreciate everybody coming for the housing element, and hopefully you'll come for the board's meeting as well. So, good day and good evening.